Today, women and LGBTQ people make up more than half of the American electorate and are more engaged than ever in our politics. Yet they remain marginalized in government and elective office.
It's important for women to have a voice in this democracy because we see women being disproportionately affected across our society in so many areas.
The power!
The reality is the news industry is already gendered. The 19th is working to level the playing field.
Our newsroom is named for the 19th Amendment, but with an asterisk, the recognition of the omission of certain women from the franchise, from access to the ballot.
We want to be carving our own way and bringing journalism that you're not going to be able to find anywhere else to the table. Our readers are people who care deeply about the intersection of gender, politics, and policy and want a more nuanced approach to that politics and policy journalism.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Live with the 19th.
With live events and interviews, the 19th is fostering civil conversations and community building that brings our readers into direct contact with the people who represent them.
There's never been a Black woman governor in American history.
I think that our newsroom being as diverse as it is, it means that we're looking and telling stories of women that maybe had not been previously represented in media before.
Our goal is to launch the first newsroom that is truly reflective of the nation's women and the LGBTQ community.
There's more women running now than ever have been before, and people want to be informed.
Because what we know is that women and LGBTQ people are eager to have conversations about politics and often do not feel like they have a safe space to do that. We want to create that community.
Newsrooms need to be more inclusive. They need to better reflect their communities. The 19th has the opportunity to do that from the ground floor, and we're not wasting that opportunity.
There's never been a better moment than right now.
The 19th is the newsroom that we've been waiting for.
Hello, and welcome to day 2 of our 3rd annual The 19th Represents Summit. I'm Amanda Zamora, co-founder and publisher of The 19th, the independent nonprofit newsroom that aims to empower you with the information, resources, and community you need to be equal participants in our democracy. Yesterday, we learned about the foundation Title IX pioneers laid for gender equality across many fields. Today, we're exploring Title IX's lasting effects on gender equality in 2 specific areas: sports and STEM. We'll hear from WNBA champion Candace Parker and Paralympic athlete Scout Bassett about Title IX's impact on equity in sports, and we'll also speak to renowned climate scientist Kate Calvin, Nobel laureate Jennifer Doudna, and other leaders in the fields of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics about expanding access to education and careers in STEM. Before we begin, I want to thank those who helped make this week possible, including presenting sponsors, the Impact Seat Foundation and the Walton Family Foundation, and our supporting sponsors, the Barbara Lee Family Foundation, the Girls' Rights Project, the Lumina Foundation, and the Tory Burch Foundation. We'd also like to thank our media partner, USA Today, our academic partner, Arizona State University, and our community partner, the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Library here in Washington, D.C. A quick note that while sponsors help to keep the 19th Represents free for all viewers to attend, they play no part in our event programming. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce our first conversation of the day. Here is the 19th's editorial director, Abby Johnston, in conversation with Candace Parker, who is a 2-time Olympic gold medalist and WNBA champion, and producer of the documentary Title IX, 37 Words That Changed America. Abby, over to you.
Thanks, Amanda. Candace, thank you so much for being here with me today. I especially appreciate you being here even as the season is underway, but I can truly think of few better people to talk to about Title IX and its impact on sports than you. So you've marked the 50th anniversary of these protections in a really big way with the documentary Title IX, 37 Words That Changed America, which you produced. I definitely want to talk about that, but I'd first like to back up a little bit and ask, do you remember the first time that you heard of Title IX?
I do. It's so interesting. In doing the documentary 37 Words that we'll later talk about, we came across an article that was in one of our scrapbooks, and it was a Title IX article when I was a sophomore in high school. And I remember doing a paper on Title IX in middle school. So I have always been, well-versed in this topic, as well as I attended University of Tennessee and a lot of us basketball players there definitely minored in Title IX with Coach Summit as our head coach. She made sure that we knew, all we needed to about it.
So in the documentary, you talk about how your family is a really great example of how much Title IX has changed in just one generation, or how much Title IX has had an impact. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, I fall in the middle of two very different generations. And I say that in my mom, attended the University of Iowa 1972 to 1976. And her senior year in high school was the first year that Title IX was enacted. So growing up, she didn't have junior high basketball or soccer or even in high school. And then when she got to college, it was still intramural and recreational type of sports. And then now I look at my daughter and I see so many different opportunities and so many doors that have been opened as a result of the Billie Jean Kings and the Lisa Leslies and those that came before us that really fought for us to be able to play and to attend universities and to learn the life skills that sports teach you. And so I think just being able to have that unique position, I realized we have so much further to go, but we've come so far in 50 years.
Yeah. And I know it must have been really special to have your mom in the documentary as well.
My mom, just being a part of the documentary, she's a picture taker. So she supplied all the videos and all the pictures. And, you really had to make a concerted effort to video then, because it was like the camcorder and all of that. So for her to have those type of videos of me as a kid and she encouraged me always and, always told me that I could do anything I set my mind to. And, just to have her a part of this documentary was so important.
Yeah, no, it was a great voice. And I loved all the footage of you playing basketball with your brothers when you were little. And the picture of you when you were hugging the basketball, it was almost as big as you were at that point. It was just some really special and intimate stuff in 37 words.
Thank you so much.
There were a ton of trailblazers who appeared in the documentary. You were talking a little bit about them. The people who were driving forces behind Title IX as we know it today. And so, as a self-described history buff, what was it like to have these women who were just so seminal be a part of this project?
I did a project on Billie Jean King, and it was surreal for me to have a documentary of something that she directly opened doors for me and my generation, and then to have her in that documentary and to have her want to be a part of that. And to realize that she really has dedicated her entire life to ensuring that young girls have the opportunity through sport to learn life skills. And it's surreal. I mean, she texted me the other day and I still have to pinch myself because I'm a Billie Jean King fan and, always will be.
I'm sure now there's a lot of Candace Parker fans who are looking up and able to look at these, something that you created that you felt compelled to create that is hopefully teaching them a lot of about the history of how we have more equity in sports now.
I think it's so important for us to continue those conversations. I definitely want to empower young girls and women to continue to strive, dream, and understand that they deserve a seat at the table, whether it's swinging a bat, whether it's kicking a soccer ball, or whether it's, being at the table that decisions are made, being on the ownership, being on boards, different things like that. And, it's no secret that in the business world, Fortune 500 companies, a lot of their women leaders played team sports. And so it really is crucial in the learning as you're coming up and learning to work in a team environment and things like that, because I think it equips you for the future.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. There's so much more that you can take from it, even if you don't pursue sports in a professional sense. Title IX protections obviously cleared the way for women's sports in so many ways, but as we know, with everything from pay equity to the kinds of facilities that women get, there's a long way to go in terms of reaching gender equity in sports. So what are some of the steps that you'd like to see happen to get there?
I think you're in a great place with anything when you're not being reactive, you're being proactive. And I would like to see Title IX be more proactive. We always focus on college and collegiate and federally funded universities, but there's so many disparities at the grassroots level, at the elementary, at the middle school. And I think that that's when you're seeing young girls, especially dropping out of sports, is usually right around puberty. 11 to 13 is when you see the biggest drop off. Why is that? And so what are they being told up into that point? So for me, I would love to see this law be more proactive and really empower those that it's trying to protect. And usually those voices aren't heard at the elementary and the junior high level when, in the high school level, when those bars are being set, that the boys get the new uniforms just because they're boys and the girls get the hand-me-downs. And that's not fair. And that's not how it should be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think, as you said, you have known about Title IX for a long time. This is something that you've researched a ton, and then you made a documentary about it. As you were kind of researching and going through this process, was there anything that you learned in the history or how it's applied even today that really surprised you?
The journey of Title IX, the ups and downs. But I also think yes, there's the names, you hear the names of the people that have been just behind Title IX, but I think it's the moms. In my documentary, we were able to touch on a mom that was not okay with her daughter not having a good softball facility to play in. And it's the parents that are the driving force. It's the moms, it's the dads that recognize that their daughters don't have the same opportunities as their sons. And, I am the youngest of three. I have two older brothers, and my dad coached all of us. And I think through coaching girls, like, he realized, just how awesome and how crucial and how important it is for girls to continue to play in team sports. And so I think it's the little steps that I've realized that are really making the biggest difference in bringing about change.
I love that part in the documentary where, your dad's talking about coaching your brothers, and then your mom actually comes on and is like, I wanted to make sure that Candace also got the experience of being coached by her father. And I just thought that it's so true, because a lot of times that doesn't even occur in a lot of those kind of situations for a dad to step in and coach his daughters and rather than sons.
It's so important. And just in terms of being coached, and I was lucky because I attended a university where Coach Summit said, I'm going to coach you as a basketball player. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's so important, is sometimes we're so focused on girls and boys and how do you reach them and how do you coach them? And I think I was fortunate in my upbringing. My dad coached me. He coached me as a basketball player, and he didn't allow me to put limitations and, put limitations on myself. And, same thing at Tennessee with Coach Summit. And so I think it's so important for us to continue to empower young girls and boys, not to be professional athletes, but to learn the life skills to persevere in life, because you're going to have wins and losses in life itself. And, obviously to be a good teammate and to work in a team setting.
Mm-hmm. So equity in sports, or even a lack of it, extends beyond the, players. So women are underrepresented in so many roles in professional sports, including broadcasts. You are the only woman studio broadcaster for Turner. And so what does that mean for you to break through in that role? And why do you think that has been such a barrier for women?
Perception is one of those things in our society that it takes a long time for change to come. I think it takes one taking a chance, and then it's kind of one of those effects that it just has an impact on another organization or another television company. And for me, I think coming in, I wanted to talk sports, and I hope that at some point in the future we're able to really focus on the person that has the job. Because listen, if the criteria is playing in the NBA, there would be a number of broadcasters across the board that would not have a job because they didn't play in the NBA. But we listen to them because they are male. And so I guess my goal and my hope is to break down that stereotype and to continue to do that through sports and through just being out there. I mean, I want to open up the doors for more women to be able to come in and sit at the table and be able to talk sports and be respected doing it.
Do you think that you were touching on something there about, we listen to male broadcasters because they're men, even if they weren't a professional athlete or hadn't played in the NBA, NFL, MLB, whatever. Do you think that there, in general, is a kind of bias toward men being able to be experts on subjects where women typically aren't allowed to?
100%. And I think that growing up, my parents told me that I have to be 10 times more prepared because I am an African-American woman. And I held on to that. But also, I think going in, I want to make this clear. I don't try to be one of the guys. And I've said this a number of times. I try to be one of the players. I'm a basketball player. And I hope at some point, I mean, my hope for my daughter and my son's generation is that when they walk into the room, the best person gets the job. And I want to be judged. If you don't like me, I think it's evident in social media and in that kind of environment. If you don't like me because of my viewpoint, but don't dislike me because I'm a woman or because I am Black. And I think that that's the major thing that we have to get past, is that if you are male, you are right. If you are a woman, you have to prove that you're right. And, I just hope that through the Robin Roberts, through, number of women that are on television broadcasting and doing an amazing job, I hope we're able to continue to open doors and to continue to change perceptions.
You mentioned your daughter, and I actually wanted to ask about her. I was curious if you think by the time, going back to Title IX, that she's college age, if there are going to be notable changes in Title IX, what Title IX protections could do for her that maybe weren't even afforded to you.
My daughter's 13, and I hope in 5 years we're able to continue to strive to do better. I believe in pivotal moments. We had a pivotal moment in 2020 as a country where we had to, come together and look ourselves in the mirror and face race, right? And I think within women's sports, we had a pivotal moment in 2021 where we had to come together and look and see the inequities in our face through an Instagram post. We were able, through Sedona, who posted the women's weight room. And I think everybody in women's sports was not surprised by that. We weren't surprised. We were actually surprised that people were surprised. Mm-hmm. And I think because of that, we've had some changes being made. But just as in 2020, people's attention goes elsewhere, it's the same thing with women's sports. It's a hot topic, and then you have to fight to keep it a hot topic. And I think that that's the biggest thing now. We're making strides, but are we going to continue to make those strides? And I hope in 5 years, we're able to sit here and still the WNBA is continuing to expand and grow, as well as women in sports and the inequities, especially with the NCAA and their treatment of facilities, their treatment of players, just across the board. And I think NIL, social media, all of those things are helping to level the playing field, because you can no longer now just say, well, women can't sell. When you look at Paige Beckers, and she has 1 million plus followers, and on overtime, she gets, a certain amount of hits, and then her male counterpart doesn't. So I think now social media is actually going to really, put Title IX to the fire, because it's proving, monetarily that women can sell, and, women's sports sells.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, because that is the classic argument, right? Is that, well, it's not that we don't care about women's sports, it's that we're investing in things that are already profitable. And so it's interesting to hear your take on that with social media, because that's like taking it out of kind of TV metrics and putting it sort of directly in the hands of people, right?
It's putting it directly in the hands of people, but it's also in brands proving numbers and showing you statistics. I mean, we live in an analytical world where it's analytics. Well, here they are. And now we're able to track how much is sold. Now we're able to track that women do sell shoes, because guess what? Women usually are the people that are buying within the household. There is a market. Is it a different market for men's sports? Yes, but there is a market where women's sports and women's shoes can sell. And, it's being proven now through social media, through followers, and, through brands being able to get those statistics.
So you've just started your 15th WNBA season, but so congratulations first off, obviously a huge force on the court. But so it's one of your first seasons or your first season playing after coming out. And I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about how the WNBA has shown up for its queer players.
Well, first, I think it's so important to recognize that in the WNBA, we are the majority of the minority in this country. And I say that in the sense of we are a league of women. We are predominantly African-American. We come from different socioeconomic backgrounds, different communities. And I think with that being said, we feel a need to represent those communities through our voices. We feel like we want to be those voices for those that feel like they're not heard. And with that being said, I think there's a number of things across the board that the WNBA does a phenomenal job to bring attention to raise up, to empower. And it's because we represent that. And, I think everybody wants to feel supported, and it's so important that we continue to support individuals that may not do things that, are the status quo or, have a different point of view. And I think the WNBA has done a great job of that.
The WNBA, I think in so many ways has led, put a blueprint out for athletes in other leagues. The NBA, I think, is really the most influenced in terms of activism and using voices and seeing people as people and not just as a basketball player, right? Somebody who has an opinion, who wants to put their voice to something. And it's just very striking to me, because I think that it's a lot of that, the activism that we've seen from players has originated from the WNBA.
It's originated, and I think it's been authentic within it, regardless. Obviously we understand the attention that the NBA gets, and that is great, especially for causes that we support and causes that we kind of connect with them with. But the WNBA has always kind of had their feet on the ground and have fought. And so I think just the authenticity of the moment really showed, and I think people gravitated towards that. And anytime you're able to, have the mic and have the moment, use it to uplift others. And that's what the WNBA is about. And I hope that's what we continue to be about.
Absolutely. Well, ahead of this season, you said that this could also be your last season. Now that we've got things underway, I'd just love to get an update on that status.
I'm one of those people that I'm not probably going to have a tour. I'm not the one that's going to announce, ahead of the season. For me, I always said I'm going to wake up and know. And in the off season, my family and I, for the last 4 or 5 years, have made that decision together collectively, whether it's for the best for all of us, for me to play. And so, obviously I know there's a lot more basketball behind me than in front of me. I can tell you that for sure. But in terms of this being my last year, I don't know. We'll see. We'll see how the off season goes. And, I think that's a question. I mean, maybe I'll play, 5 more years. Maybe I'll play 1. Who knows?
Well, Candace, thank you so much for being here with me today. Again, in the middle of the season with a newborn at home, but we really appreciate the time, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Abby and Candace, for a fantastic keynote to kick off the day. As we get further into today's conversations, we hope you'll help us spread the word by sharing what you're learning with the hashtag 19th Represents. Up next, we're talking about college sports, where investment in women and underrepresented athletes has an outsized impact on their ability to find success beyond the sports world. We're talking with former college athletes about this and ongoing gender disparities in sports. Joining us are professional tennis player Brittany Collins, Tori Tyson, head softball coach at Howard University, Candace Story Lee, Vice Chancellor for University Affairs and Athletic Director at Vanderbilt University, U.S. Representative Lori Trahan, a Democrat from Massachusetts, and Victoria Jackson, a clinical assistant professor at Arizona State University and moderator for today's conversation. Victoria?
Thank you, Amanda. It is an honor and a privilege to moderate this esteemed panel for this amazing Title IX Summit organized by the 19th. When Richard Nixon signed Title IX on June 23, 1972, the vast majority of Americans, even those who worked in higher education and even college sports, hadn't realized that not only would this law revolutionize women's access to higher education, it would revolutionize women's opportunities to participate in college sports too. In 1972, women were playing college sports. We need to keep that in mind. And they were excelling and they were achieving, but they were doing so with barely any support. They were rocking it at historically Black colleges, actually. Places like Tennessee State and the Tiger Bells were leading US Olympic teams, and it's important to remember that history too. But comparatively, now 50 years later, we have programs that are nearly comparably funded. We have world-class infrastructure on our college campuses. We have a model that the world looks to and tries to emulate. 2 in 5 high school girls play sports for their schools. And we have a ratio of about 45-55 of athletes playing men's sports and women's sports in the college space. That really matters. There are 220,000 NCAA women athletes this day. That took a lot of work. It took generations of work. It took work on the ground. It took work to work against all the resistance and foot dragging. And there's a tradition and a history of opting into the responsibility of doing that work in women's sports. So we're here to celebrate that today. I'm a historian of American college sports and Title IX, and I love teaching the political, economic, and cultural context in which women's college sports have experienced this rise. But what I really, really love about Title IX is the stories that bring to life this law and what it has meant to American women over the years. All of us seem to have an intimate relationship with Title IX. And so I've asked each of our panelists to share a personal story to capture this relationship with this really critical, important law in US history. I asked them to think about generational change over time, or stories that get to and capture what this law means to them personally. So Congressman Lori Trahan, let's start with you. What's your Title IX story?
Well, I guess my story starts with my grandparents, coming to the United States. My grandmother from Brazil, my grandfather from Portugal, and they came just like so many other immigrants did, right? They wanted to create a better life for their family, and so I was born with the dream of going to college, right? That was sort of the epitome of building a better future. But, my parents didn't have the money to go to college. My father was a union iron worker, and my mom, juggled multiple part-time minimum wage jobs while juggling my 3 sisters and me. And so when college would come up, there was a lot of anxiety in our household around the conversation. And I ended up being a first-generation college graduate because of my volleyball scholarship. I knew I wanted to go to Georgetown at an early age. And if I hadn't blessed with the growth spurt and with a little bit of talent to play, I don't know if college would have been in the cards for me. And so that that law transformed my life. It changed the trajectory of my life. And I recognize that I probably wouldn't have been where I am today if it weren't for Title IX.
Dr. Candace Story-Lee, let's hear your Title IX story, please.
Well, there's a lot of things that come to mind, but there's two things that I would mention. One, I think about, so I'm 6'3", and I've been 6'3" for a long time. So I was about 6 feet tall and like 9 or 10 years old, and trying to figure out what to do with all that height. And my dad had asked me to try many recreational things. Wasn't good at any of them. Finally, we were about to give up, and he said, how about basketball? And there was like a boys' league. And I found myself being really cool because I was so much taller. It wasn't good, but all the boys thought I was cool because I was tall, and it developed into a love of the game. And I mentioned that because, it was much like what Lori is saying, that, it really provided a pathway for me. But I also think about my niece, who is 9 years old, and she's now back in my hometown, Madison, Alabama, and she plays basketball too. And it's an all girls league. And there are 4 teams of these 8 and 9-year-old girls. And I marvel at that, because that's like a clear sign of progress. The other thing that comes to mind is I played basketball at Vanderbilt and had a tremendous experience. But the thing that I remember is that we had all the resources in our basketball program that the men had. We were equal. There was never any question about commitment. And now, as an athletic director, I really rely on that experience. I want to ensure that, our student athletes also feel that they have equitable access and a high quality experience.
Thank you. Coach Tori Tyson, let's hear your Title IX story, please.
When I think of Title IX, I remember being at the University of Nebraska, and we made it to a regional. And I mean, everybody, I believe, was watching the World Series run right now for college softball on TV. That in itself is just unreal. The fact that they finally stretched our tournament out, and it's getting treated like the Mills, the baseball World Series, and there's rest time. That in itself is just unreal to think of where that tournament started. But I remember being in my junior season, and we got sent to the University of Washington. And I was so lucky to get coached by 3 women who fought Title IX all the time. And Rhonda Ravel, it was a rain delay, and they wanted us to play. They didn't want to stretch the tournament out. So they wanted us to pick up a game, and it would have taken us all the way until like 1 a.m. And at the time, I didn't get it. Rhonda told myself and 2 other girls that were seniors and in the starting lineup, I want you to go run on the tarp. She told us to dive on the tarp and get soaked. And I'm like, okay. And there's pictures of us. And I didn't realize the power in that moment, because what she did was laid a foundation that she wanted us to have an equitable experience, and that we deserve the right to have the rest. And they wouldn't have, and she was fighting it, but she did it in such a calm manner that I remember her telling the umpire, you guys would never ask a baseball team to pick up a game at 11 o'clock at night. And there's pictures that still live on of us soaking wet and we're high-fiving. And I didn't even realize the power of that moment. So now when I see these student athletes having this amazing experience in Oklahoma City, I feel a part of it. And I remember that moment, and I know that my coaches were setting the bar. So now that I've embarked in my own coaching career, I want to be a part of the change. And I want to keep fighting, because I was around women that were fighting silently daily.
My goodness, I love the physicality of that story, the like running out on the tarp. We talk about finding our power in sport, and we know what that means, but that is such an illustrative story of what it means to find your power and fighting the power to make sure you get equitable treatment. Gosh, I love that story so much. It's reminiscent of the rowing team at Yale that walked into their athletic director's office in the 70s with Title IX written on their stomachs, because they were protesting that they didn't have locker room space after they practiced when the men did. And it's those acts that are physical acts, putting it in the face of people that really get the point across. And professional athlete Brittany Collins. We're using titles with everyone. And when you go pro in school, you become a doctor. And when you go pro in sport, there isn't any title for that, but there should be. So I'm going to call you pro athlete Brittany Collins. Can we hear your Title IX story, please?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, these are all incredible stories, and just by hearing them are like triggering a bunch of different things in my head, which is so cool because I think at the same time it's kind of a small world. And it was really interesting for me how I kind of got introduced to Title IX, because I knew of it kind of going into school. Like I knew just like, okay, there's a certain amount of scholarships for girls because of guys, but I'm going to be honest, like I wasn't really educated on it because it wasn't something I was talking about in high school. But when I transferred and showed up to UMass, it was completely different because my coach was a Title IX pioneer. I believe she was the first woman to sue and win a case for Title IX against Yale. I don't remember the decade it was in, but it was a little bit ago. And immediately the first thing we did before we practiced, before we got uniforms, before we did anything, we had a team meeting and we talked about Title IX and how our coach Judy kind of played a role in, what our team should embody and resemble as women and what we're entitled to men. And so one of the craziest stories, speaking of Yale, she told us was that she was the coach and they had one practice court and the men had 3, and the men were coming over into the women's practice court to kick them off, even though they had already had like double the time. And the men's coach told the guys team to serve at my coach's back, which is, if you know how hard men hit the ball, that is so dangerous and so scary. And so this is kind of the stories that we were kind of told, because generationally, if she's going to stand up and leave her mark, then as a team, we wanted to do the same thing. So it was always in our team's mind that Title IX is so important and people have fought for this. So we need to do the same thing.
My goodness. I mean, these stories of what we learn from the people who came before us and how we think about how we can continue that progress and that path, or continue to protect what we know we deserve, is so valuable. The woman whose papers I used to write my dissertation worked at the University of North Carolina from World War II until the early 90s. And her name was Frances Hogan, and she was the tennis coach for many of those decades. And going through her papers and finding these stories, it really brings to life the everyday battles. And we have these kind of high water marks and moments, but she, in those papers, told the story of having to lock the courts and recommending that other coaches lock the courts behind them when they get in, so that they aren't invaded by men who feel they have the right to the playing space. And, that's why the folks who put these laws into practice, the workers in the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare who sat down and wrote out the regulations, let's put law into practice and show what this looks like on the ground, why their work was so valuable and crucial to what this meant in a collegiate athletic space. Thank you, all of you, for sharing these stories. Man, this is going to make me excited for the rest of the month of June and onward from there. So, we could have a million different conversations about Title IX, and there's a million different things I love about Title IX. But the thing I love the most is that the law serves as a reminder that college sports are educational programs and activities. We've already been talking about all the learning that goes on in sporting spaces, especially for girls and women, and feeling powerful and having the right to have certain programs and activities and experiences and opportunities. We can talk about the law as written. That language, those 37 words, are about preventing discrimination. But what I like to do in the classroom when I'm teaching about Title IX is to flip it into a positive. We can talk about what the law is. This is an educational civil rights law. And we can talk about what the law means. In the context of sports, schools must provide the equal opportunity to play school sports. So it's a project. It's conveying the idea that this is a project that we need to keep working to create and expand and protect opportunities, and that they're educational opportunities. That's what makes this law so wonderful in the context of the world, that we define school sports as educational and the right to play school sports as a civil right. It's massively important. So what I want to ask all of you is, what do students learn about themselves and each other when they play sports, actually playing sports themselves? And why might these educational opportunities be especially important for young girls and women? What have you learned about yourself and your teammates, and what lessons have you carried forward? And Coach Tyson, let's start with you, since you're the one really working on a daily basis with these young people.
I think when I think of myself, I'm a single mom in sports, which is like unheard of. And I'm so grateful that I played sports, because I genuinely find myself on my most like the struggle days. So grateful that at one point in my life, I had to manage being a student and an athlete, and trying to thrive and be both. I am grateful that I was able to find my voice as I fight battles every day, especially at an HBCU level, to make it equitable for my athletes. I'm so grateful for sport that I went and had the opportunity to go to a Midwest state. I was a California girl, and I had to figure out how to find my voice and make myself seen and heard in a lot of rooms that I wouldn't have been in if it wasn't for sport. And I'm so grateful for that. And when I think of the student athletes that I have the ability to motivate, I think of how they come from so many different backgrounds. And for me, I don't think that sport is where you should find your identity, because you can't find identity in results. But I do think you can find identity in like joining this tribe of women and coming out the best version of yourself because of your experiences with them. And it's something that I now get to implement. And I understand that like, it is my job and my duty, because I had a woman that helped shape me. It is my job to help shape them so that they're prepared to stand tall in every room that they walk in. And I truly believe sports it gives us a platform to do that. And I'm grateful that women get to be in charge to help train the next generation of women. And we have a right and a duty to do that. And so I'm super grateful. Again, it gives us voice. It gives us a sense of purpose, and all things you kind of need as a parent, as a boss, as a CEO. It just gives us lessons that carry with us everywhere. And these experiences, my 9-year-old went with us to our regional at Florida State, and to see the growth of our sport, they were treating us like first-class citizens. And so she thinks like, well, I'm going to go to the WNBA now. Like, I'm going to be a professional athlete because you guys got treated like a professional athlete. And we were chartering. She got to be on the jet with us. And again, that would not have happened years ago. So our growth, Howard University softball team was on a private jet back to DC, and to see that and my daughter get to witness it, it's impacting the future. And I'm super grateful sport has done that. My daughter feels like there is no ceiling. And that is an amazing feeling.
What's your daughter's name?
Skylar Hope.
Okay, Skylar Hope. Okay, that's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. Dr. Lee, I am so impressed by the culture at Vanderbilt Athletics. And you were talking about the lessons that athletes learn directly from playing their sports. But I feel like your athletic department has really set a model for kind of weaving in education, off the field education and on the field education, and that we're not treating those things as binaries, that this learning takes place kind of cohesively. Can you talk a little bit about the culture at your athletic department and the amazing things related to thinking of Title IX as an educational civil rights law?
Well, I really appreciate what you said. I'm glad that that's a perception. That's certainly what we're trying to do. And, I would say that I agree wholeheartedly with what Coach Tyson said, and thinking about, as a student athlete, we're trying to focus on providing the most a holistic student athlete experience to our young people, and knowing that, I like how you said that, the sport, like wherever they play their sport, it is an extension of the full experience, and it's an extension of the classroom. I think about our coaches as educators. So, some of them have academic credentials, but it's like, even if they're not academicians, they are truly educators. And I think that sports just provides, I think about as a leader, I think about being a good teammate. And I learned that from playing sports. You have to be able to work alongside and be a good follower in order to be a good leader, and sports will do that for you. I think about the humility of, when you're an elite athlete like Brittany, like you think all you have to do is prepare, you're going to win, right? You're physically prepared, you're mentally tough, you are supposed to win. And sometimes you can do everything perfectly and you still don't win. Yep. And it can be so humbling. Defeat can be humbling, but the great thing about sport is that you get to come back. You get another opportunity. Our coach used to say all the time, like, basically, just because you make a bad play, don't now turn the ball over 3 times, but you got to forget it. You got to forget it, and you got to turn around and be whatever your team needs you to be. And there's so much power in sports, so what we try to do at Vanderbilt, and I know people are doing all over the country, is trying to leverage those lessons so that these student athletes, including our young women, feel empowered to take that and apply that so they can reach their potential in whatever space they're in. So, I consider that the most important part of my job.
Congresswoman Trahan, can we hear about your pathway to where you are today and the role that sport maybe has played in that, with Dr. Lee talking about lessons of winning and also losing and how hard it can be to make yourself kind of opt into doing something so vulnerable as running for office. I imagine sports played a role in that.
Oh, well, it certainly came in handy. And look, I loved listening to Coach Tyson and Dr. Lee because it is markedly different today than it was when we were playing sports. I think about what my daughters are seeing as opposed to what I saw, and that so much matters, right? I don't think my daughters are ever going to see or not see a woman running for president, right? I don't think she's ever not going to see, women's sports on TV. And we've got a lot more work to do, and we could talk about that later, but the optics matter. And I can't even emphasize enough how crucial playing sports was to just the latest thing I did, which was running for Congress. You do have to understand defeat, what to do when you lose, right? How you reflect on how you get better. The discipline of sticking with something, of practicing, learn by doing, right? I mean, all of those skills that I didn't even have an appreciation for while I was doing it as a young woman. I just did it because I wanted to win. I wanted to get a scholarship. I wanted to keep playing. I loved my team. I didn't want to let them down. And then lo and behold, I'm in the private sector, leading a sales team, and everything that I'm doing there is about, is like, drawing on the skills and the practice and of playing sports, and then winning a campaign to Congress. Those require much different skills than actually being a legislator, but they both kind of tapped into everything I learned about sports. One, how to win and get better as I go, and to do things that are uncomfortable, and to be coachable, but then also to work as a team, right? I mean, you can't, I think Dr. Lee said it best, you can't make, you can't hold on to setbacks. You have to figure out a way to get back in the game and to make the next play. And, I work with Republicans a lot because I don't feel the setbacks as deeply or as emotionally as I would if maybe I didn't play sports. And so I think everything that I've done and everything that I do just in my daily life, I could trace back to something I've done on the court. And I think that's the power that I want to teach my own daughters, which is really exciting, but that I also want to make better for them in terms of finally getting to this point where we are living up to Title IX in this 50th anniversary year.
Professional athlete Brittany Collins, I think there's such a good opportunity to talk about something more specific with your career, and that is kind of what the transition from playing college sports to professional sports both reveals about the structures we have in place in the American collegiate system, which, in tennis is so very international too. I was reading an amazing piece you wrote recently for Global Sport Matters about just how challenging that transition is, but also the kind of international makeup of your team when you were a collegian. And then also, now that you're playing, I mean, I know that you're in San Diego right now, but we could very well have been having this conversation with you in Brazil or Tunisia or somewhere else where you kind of pick up and go. And I think your experiences give an opportunity to reflect on, the excellent structures we do really have in place in American college sports, but also how those structures kind of disappear and athletes aren't necessarily prepared for them. And then what you can do, resiliency is a word that I think kind of masks a lot of different skills. But the skills that you learned as a college athlete, you're now able to adapt and navigate what is a very challenging place because of those college experiences. I don't mean to speak for you, but I sense that that's a lot of what's going on here. So can you share a little bit about that with us?
Yeah, that was perfect, because that's exactly kind of in my head what I'm listening to all you guys speak. I'm like, I want to echo all these things because they all intertwine. And for me, tennis is kind of like a weird thing. So Title IX is really important to tennis teams, because if we think about it, these are the teams that usually get cut because we're not bringing in revenue. We're not like, tons of fans aren't coming. And so without Title IX, I would have missed out on so many educational experiences. We have an incredibly international sport. So one of the biggest things I learned was learning how to cooperate with people from different cultures, which is incredibly difficult and not something as an American that I had the chance to have growing up. And so that just fundamental of learning to work together, learning to communicate, having an open mind really transformed me in the ability that I later would come to realize that, oh my God, the structure of my life has completely changed. I'm now having to be resourceful, and I'm going to have to work with people that don't have the same beliefs as me, but we need to get to the same kind of common goal. And so that, and just thinking of my teammates, those lessons we learned, and being, with Title IX, I think being independent, being a strong woman, working together, those transform for me, but also for my friends who now we talk about all the time, like they're in the workforce, and, whatever career path you go down, being able to represent yourself well, stand up and be resourceful is so important. So the struggles on professional tennis tour and the entry stages have been very difficult, but I think mentally I've been able to be a lot more resilient, and just, I do miss things that were in place, like people, helping me out with scheduling and all that kind of stuff. But just having the kind of, I would say, experiences through having an international team really prepared me well. And I can see how that might be different from other people on tour that just never either went to college and just went straight on the tour. And they're kind of like individualized people, because tennis is a very individualized sport. And that whole team dynamic just, I think, really helps me out majorly.
Oh, I love that. And I love pointing out that all these individual sports in the college space, we turn them into team sports.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I won a national championship because my teammate Jackie Johnson was so good at what she did. She lifted up our whole program to inspire us to also win national championships, and we won a team title, and the men even won a team title because Jackie Johnson was so good. So Jackie Johnson, I like to tell everyone at Arizona State University, is our GOAT. She is the athlete everyone at ASU should say, that's the best athlete we've had as a Sun Devil. This all segues really nicely into a discussion about how your experiences playing sports have helped prepare you for the leadership and service roles you hold today. If there are public servants and civil actors and civically responsible people, they are often people who played women's college sports. And so in all of your positions today, we have all sorts of sectors of work and sport represented here. Using your platform for the change you want to see in college sports in the world. Something I always am sure to discuss when I meet with college athletes is that we all hold the opportunity to say yes and opt in to doing the work to make our sports and society better, to ensure that we eventually leave our sports or organizations in a better place than what they had been when we had arrived, and to protect the progress that had been made by our predecessors. Coach Tyson, the story you told about, the lessons you learned from your coach and you're now implementing really get to that. It's this taking of the baton, acknowledging and opting into the responsibility of doing this work. And this mission then, of course, transcends college sports and transcends sports. We see women who've played college sports going on to make change in all sorts of ways in the world. In the sporting space, this historic collective bargaining agreement we saw with US soccer and the US women's national team and the US men's national team really provides a model for inspiration and aspiration globally. You know, they're taking on FIFA next and equalizing prize money in that space. And so I think the power of sport for change, both within sporting institutions and within broader society, is one of the foremost legacies of Title IX and women who've come through college sports. You four really showcase this. And before, we're not wrapping yet, but I want to stop for a second and thank you. This work is a lot, and I'm so appreciative of the work that you do in your respective roles. So thank you for embracing doing this work and taking on and saying yes to these leadership responsibilities in your latest roles. So I'm interested to hear about projects you're most excited about that you're working on today, and how have your sporting experiences set you up to do this work. And Congresswoman Trahan, if we could start with you both. You know, I know you're involved in college sports advocacy and reform there, but in the sporting space and beyond too, please.
Yeah, so I loved what you said at the beginning. I think it's interesting that time and time again, women athletes have been, underfunded, undersupported, sometimes even left to fend for themselves, yet we've succeeded in spite of that. And I think the women on this panel are proof of that. And I think that's the approach I've always carried with me since my playing days. It fueled me when I worked as a public servant just after college, working my way up to chief of staff to a congressman. It informed my decision-making as the only female executive at a tech company. It's the reason I helped co-found and run a consulting firm that worked with some of the largest companies around the world to elevate women into leadership positions in the workplace. And it truly is the foundation on which I've built my approach to legislating. So much of what I work on is built around ways to create better outcomes for women to succeed, because, I truly believe that when women have a voice at the decision-making table, one, we make better decisions and we achieve just better outcomes, right? And that's why I've been focusing on getting working moms who had to leave their jobs during the pandemic back into the workforce, all the way to working with Senator Murphy on legislation pertaining to college rights, right? Impacts on women athletes are always my first thought. And together we introduced two bills along those lines. The first is the College Athlete Economic Freedom Act, which creates a national standard to ensure that athletes can benefit from their name, image, and likeness. And the second bill is the College Right to Organize Act, which would allow athletes to join together to advocate for things like training facilities and health services. And of course, advocating for any sort of positive change in today's political climate has its challenges, but that's where being an athlete has prepared me to put in the work to get it done. So it really is about making sure that we make it better for the future generations. And I think there is a really cool conversation right now that is happening that wasn't happening when I was playing. And I think that's going to bode well for women, because women's sports are the growth of sports, right? I mean, we see it today. We see the surge in attendance and following. I know my kids are super jazzed by what they see. And so when you think of how that's going to, sort of maintain the growth and the interest in college sports, I think women are where it's at. And so we want to make sure that the conditions are set for women to thrive, which is why we've spent some time with some pretty exciting legislative proposals in that regard.
Brittany, I know you have to literally run off to a tennis tournament. So I want to pivot to you really quickly before you hop off to do that. You, I know, have been engaged in much of the advocacy that Congresswoman Trahan was just talking about. And so you're now using your platform and your voice and learning from your experiences to advocate for the change you'd like to see in the collegiate space. Can you talk about those efforts and maybe what had happened to you to stimulate that?
Yeah, I will. Yeah, sorry that I have to run soon. I'm actually enjoying this conversation so much. This is, I always say, like, as educational as this may be for anybody else, it's actually most educational for myself, just from hearing from other people. So I really appreciate that. And yeah, just by a weird accident, to sum it up, I ended up losing my career and my teammates. We had a A10 championship title in 2017. All of that is gone now because of amateurism. I say amateurism with quotes, rules that the NCAA kind of came down on us because somebody made a clerical error for $252. And it ended up kind of sparking this kind of actually oddly national and sometimes international rage because there were so many issues with it, from the fact that you don't see men's teams, with doing a lot worse things, getting in trouble, and just by the fact that athletes were getting punished for something that they had nothing to do with. And so I just was like so dumbfounded by the fact that my career was gone for something I had nothing to do with 3 years after graduating school, and an event that was so important to myself and teammates, that I wrote this petition and it kind of circulated around. And I didn't even know there was like a college athletes advocacy world. And that really inspired me to jump into the conversation and get as involved as I possibly could, because during my time at college, I experienced a lot of different things that were very difficult for me and for my teammates. And I just recognized was not right. And that college athletes shouldn't have to endure these kinds of things. And so when I learned that there was a space that I could get involved in and speak up to any degree that anybody would listen, I wanted to do that because I wanted to show other athletes that they can also do that. And that is the upside to social media and social media platforms. And so I have my eggs in a lot of different baskets. I've been working with Senator Murphy, Senator Booker, Congresswoman Trahan, like on all these important issues from, I think for me, the most important things are physical and mental health for athletes, but they're all interrelated. So I also tried really hard to work on the Massachusetts NIL bill, just to make sure that, if we can provide some economic safety, then that will trickle into later on, like physical, mental, all these things. And so I'm a little bit all over the place because I never want to say no. And so that's why it's so great to be on a conversation like today. But I just think it's really important to take these opportunities, because you don't know what life that you're inspiring in a college athlete to speak out against. And so against, problematic behaviors in college. So I've been really lucky to do so thus far. And I just hope that I can continue having important conversations like these so that other athletes feel like they are entitled to do the same thing.
That work, Brittany, and sharing it with us. And if you need to hop
off really fast, not because I have to go, but because I'm so nervous.
Impressive. That was so impressive. Such an impressive summary. I'd like to close with our two people who work most directly in intercollegiate athletics, Dr. Lee and Coach Tyson. Thank you so much for doing the work that you do in this space. We've been hearing a lot of conversations in this space right now about burnout. And I know people were burnt out before the pandemic in intercollegiate athletics. And the last 2 years have just been really hard to support and serve our students who play sports. And just so many incredible challenges, the racial reckoning after the murder of George Floyd, and the way athletes have been engaged in wanting to talk about that and the toll it's taken, especially on Black athletes and intercollegiate athletics as well. I want to thank you for that work that you do that is enriching and exhausting, and acknowledge all of that work. I also am curious, since a lot of our conversation has been kind of future focused and generational change oriented, if there's something you want to see in the future, or what wisdom you could share with this next generation of athletes coming up. Coach Tyson, you see it every day, I'm sure, with your daughter. But what would you say to this next generation? How do they take the baton and continue this work? But what hope do we have for the future in women's college sports?
Well, one, I think the representation and continuing to get it out there and training them on how to use their platform and their voice. And I think something Brittany alluded to is that there's so much like lack of education on just this topic. And how do you, that they have a right to an equitable experience. And that is something that I think we have to educate. My daughter won at a young age, right? Like she watches me fight battles daily, and I love that. because she's going to know that one, that is owed to her, and she's allowed to. You wouldn't believe how many young student athletes like I run into, or that even at the high school level, that don't realize that they have a right to an equitable experience, or even how to argue it, and to do that. And I think that I'm in a very unique experience that we often feel like we have to battle by, like as a coach, right? Like leveraging a job. Somebody has to be able to stay and show how to fight a daily battle with tact. And I think that that is something that I've really tried to thrust myself into. And again, that experience forever changed me. And we're fighting for facilities, right? And so it's tough because you hear that if you don't have we don't have a baseball team. So then what do you do there? Like, there's nothing to compare to, but it is, you have to let yourself be seen. So when we struggle, we have facility issues here. I have us go practice right in front of the gym, and they're watching us get after it, and they have to see us. And again, it shouldn't always be that. I think that we have to make ourselves be seen. So it's not like you have to complain. I want them to see it and feel it. We shouldn't always have to go and cause a rage on a social media for that to happen. And so I want them to know, let yourself be seen, and you are allowed to fight for an equitable experience. And I think this next generation, Skylar's age group, they're gonna know. I'm like excited for them. And I think that we just have to empower that. I have to let it be okay for her to use her voice, to let it be okay for her to see me using mine and my athletes. I have her sit in on my conversations when we do have these. There are certain things that come up, and I let my team know we're going to do this and we're going to handle it this way for this next generation. So I think it's just empowering, encouraging, but most importantly, educating them that they have the right to these experiences and how to go about it. So I think Brittany's story is so cool because so many athletes and just young women in sports in general have no idea how to go about this, or that they have the right to go about certain things. So I'm super excited to continue just to be an educator and do my part in that.
Thank you, Coach Tyson. That's inspiring. Dr. Lee, with the last minute we have left, and I'm sorry for the hard stop, can you tell us your thoughts for the future?
I just want to say, like, everything was so cool today. So I'm so glad to be a part of it. It was so enriching. And I would say that every woman on here showed that, like, within our own realms, we can make an impact. Right. So, like, you cannot do everything, but there is something that you are uniquely positioned to affect. And if we can do that for each other, especially in the spaces that were not carved out for us, which we all know about those spaces, because that's most spaces, then, I mean, what an impact we can have. So, I mean, it's a real privilege. So.
Thank you all. Thank you to our esteemed panelists. Thank you, Faith Smith, Marissa Nelson, Amanda, and everyone at the 19th. This is an incredible program you've put together. And thank you to the audience for learning with us. Creating, expanding, and protecting inclusive participation opportunities in school sports takes ever-present work. And I hope this conversation has served as inspiration to opt in and say yes to that civic responsibility. Thank you.
Thanks, Victoria. I'm Erin Haynes, editor-at-large at the 19th, and it is now my pleasure to introduce Coach Dawn Staley, 3-time Olympic gold medalist and 2-time women's college basketball championship coach. We'll discuss her career as a trailblazer and a leader, her thoughts on Title IX implementation today, and the work that she's doing to support WNBA star Brittany Griner, who has been wrongfully detained in Russia for over 100 days. Coach Staley, thank you so much for making the time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, you sit at the intersection of so many of the themes that we're going to be talking about this week. And I just really can't think of anybody better to ask about the legacy and the impact of Title IX and the work that's really left undone on gender equity in general in this country. So thank you for doing this. Let's get started. I think I probably want to start by just asking you what Title IX means to you. And if you can share with our audience about the direct impact Title IX has had on your life, on your career.
I think Title IX has just given me an opportunity to be in a space that, if it wasn't for that law, I don't know where half of us females would be. So I was able to go to school, get a full ride at the University of Virginia. I was able to continue to play professional basketball. And then obviously that has led to me being, getting into the coaching profession. And, you know, in that space, I've been allowed to just have the opportunity to excel in this sport that's so very dominated by male counterparts.
Yeah. I mean, how have you've had such a storied career, which is my kind of polite way of saying you've been here for a minute, you've been doing this for a while. How have you seen gender equity in sports kind of evolve or change over your career? And what is probably the major way that you still see it needing to change?
Well, I mean, it's change in that, I mean, so many young people are involved in sports. So many young females are involved in sports. That's one. I mean, another way that it's changed, but it's still the same in that even in this space, we have to fight for some of the things that we deem equitable to our success. I mean, it's a necessity to our success. And I say equitable and not equal because there's some things that, for instance, that I would like in our program that the men's basketball coach wouldn't necessarily need in his program. And I think I'm in a space where I'm able to see those things, say those things, and you know, more times than not, when it's brought to someone's attention, there's change, especially in the place where I work. I can't say that is true for every female coach on any level, not just basketball. I mean, there are Olympic sports, there are other sports in which some women have been fighting their entire careers, and some will in the future continue to fight that. I've been very fortunate to be around people that they may not move at the drop of a hat, but with a little coaching, they move. And I'm happy that I'm a part of that movement. And because I'm a part of that movement, I want to lend a voice to what's happening where I live, where I work, in hopes that someone can utilize the same strategy.
Yeah, I'm really curious about that. I mean, because here you are, a two-time winning, women's college basketball coach, and you're still fighting for equitable resources. I mean, talk about an example of that. Where you are, where you had to speak up for something specific that you needed for your program that maybe wouldn't be something that the men's program would necessarily think about, or maybe they didn't need themselves.
Well, I mean, I could probably just point. And I don't want to selfishly look at this, but this is probably the biggest example I have of explaining this part of it. At the University of South Carolina, my 14-year career there, we've had sustained success over the past 10 years. And my male counterpart did not have that same type of sustained success. Now he was pretty successful throughout his stint at South Carolina. But if you looked at where he started, his salary started to where his salary ended up being, and then you look where my salary started and where my salary was up until last fall, he got more of a raise than I did. And our success versus their success is not comparable. So I chose to utilize that instance to raise the awareness of equal pay. Now, my deal overall is equal, but the year to year wasn't equal. But the most important thing to me was just making sure that my overall salary contract negotiations ended up being they're equal equitable to what the men's coach was getting.
Yeah.
So,
yeah,
I
and
mean,
I don't think that was selfish, actually, Coach Staley, because you being transparent about that means that it's not just for you, that other coaches, that other folks in other programs can look at what you did and hear your story, and they can understand how to, you're kind of giving them a roadmap for how to advocate for themselves. And it seems like that's something that's important for you.
Yeah, I mean, you do have to self-advocate. You do, because I find that a lot of people are just really, they're okay. They're comfortable with, if you got a pretty good living going on, you don't want to rock the boat. You just want to live comfortably, and it may not be right, but there are some out there that want what their worth is. And we don't oftentimes get our worth, and we don't oftentimes know how to pursue that. And sometimes it's just knocking on your boss's door and just sitting down and have a conversation. I think the most important thing with me throughout this occurrence was that I had a relationship with my boss. And that's important. When you have a relationship with somebody, you make it very difficult for them to tell you no. You do. If you have no interaction with your boss, and the first time you go in and talk to her or him, is the time that you're asking for a raise. More times than not, you're not going to get it. But if you've had that, and you walk in, you say, I got a serious conversation. I want to have a serious conversation with you. You go through the steps of why you think you deserve to get a raise or deserve to get equal pay. They'll hear you out. They will. They'll hear you out. And more times than not, it's difficult for them to say no.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think, you already talked about kind of the issue of pay equity. I want to ask you about what you see as really kind of the biggest barriers remaining to gender equity in sports. I mean, what can you say about the disparities? You talked about pay, like I said, facilities, airtime, promotion, respect. I mean, what would you say are some of the big disparities that still remain?
Well, I mean, the biggest disparity remains in probably our tournament, our NCAA tournament. Whereas, and most people won't know that the men's basketball tournament is its own entity. Like it used to be March Madness, was all about men's basketball, but we were just kind of, we didn't even utilize the March Madness branding,
right?
Because that wasn't ours. It's since changed, but every other championship, it could be women's basketball, it could be softball, it could be women's soccer, it could be baseball, it could be all those other sports are all bunched in together as the other championships. Mm-hmm. So if you have to put on our championship and all those other championships, you're going to end up in the red. Mm-hmm. So we look like we're all losing money. Mm-hmm. And men's basketball looks like it's just all in the black, and they're paying for the rest of our championships. Well, if you can treat women's basketball just as a sport, as its own entity, like men's basketball, then I think you'll find that we can be revenue producing. Mm-hmm. We're not revenue producing because we're in with all the other championships that it takes a whole lot of money to put those championships on. So when we're able to be treated like a sport of its own and see how much money we can drum up or lose, because we could lose money, I doubt it, but I think we can be a high performing, high revenue producing sport that you can certainly get the return on that 10 times over.
Yeah. And to your point, it's not about the lack of talent, it's about the lack of investment and the commitment to elevating you all to the same degree that men's sports are elevated, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's about the total investment. If you invest in women's sports, if you invest in women, I do think you bring a different perspective. You bring, I mean, we think differently. It doesn't mean we think we think about things that don't produce and make things better. We just think differently, and it's okay to think differently. Like I think Black people think differently. Yeah. So that's why I think you should have women. I think you should have Black people a part of the decision-making process in wherever there is an issue, wherever there's a company, whether you should have all those perspectives in the room. And you may not go with that perspective, but you certainly can help you build up your decision. It just reinforces that what you're thinking about is good or not. So if you don't have that perspective, you're just thinking singularly. And when it's just a singularly thinking group, you may not be thinking about other things that may come up that can derail that. So I mean, diversity is truly important. I think hopefully we're figuring that out in 2022.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, you talked about what these higher education institutions can do to really make Title IX more real. Is there something in terms of policy that you think the government still needs to do? And really, what can the rest of us do to really invest in the way that we're talking about in gender equality in this country?
Well, I mean, I think with anything, you have to make it a priority. When someone makes it a priority, things get done. The decision makers, the lawmakers, the politicians, all the people who move our country, if they make women a priority, we will be just that. If they don't, we'll scratch and claw, voice by voice, to shed light on it until it becomes a priority.
Yeah, and I mean, 50 years after Title IX, why do you think that still hasn't happened? I mean, we're half the population. We're more than half the people who vote in this country.
It's comfort, I mean, people are comfortable with the way they do things. They may not necessarily be right, but I mean, think about this. If, I could live comfortably, just doing what I do every day. Like, go about my business, run our women's basketball team, win basketball games, win championships, and just, okay, I'm good. No, because it's not about that. It's about advancing our sport. It's about advancing women. It's about lending a voice to things that will bring about change in our sport. And if you bring about change in a sport, there's a high possibility that there'll be change in corporations, in Fortune 500 companies, when it comes to diversity, when it comes to Black women, when it comes to women in general. So that's what we have to do. That's what we have to continue to do, is use our voices as a tool of power.
Yeah. And I mean, speaking of that, I mean, you're doing just that. You are making the release of Brittany Griner from Russian detention a priority in your life, something that you don't have to do, but something, well, maybe you do feel like you have to do it. I want to talk to you about that because you've been such an unrelenting champion for her. You're making videos every single day. I mean, talk about why this is so important for you. Talk about why more Americans should care, and talk about maybe why you think more people aren't paying attention to this.
I mean, Brittany, I consider a dear friend, someone that I coached, I've known over the past 10 years, and she's a wife, she's a daughter, she's a legend, she's an Olympian, she represented this country, she's a WNBA player, she is highly recognizable, and I feel bad that she has to spend a third of a year of her life and counting in a Russian prison that our country has deemed her being wrongfully detained. When someone's in the wrong, when they're in the wrong, if they're detaining one of us wrongly, then we need to do something about it. Obviously, our government has said just that. And I don't think they're just sitting on their hands on this. I do think these things take time. But I'm hoping somebody's really thinking about Brittany every day and what she has to endure in a Russian prison. You know, she's 6'8". You know, they probably don't make beds that she can comfortably fit in. There's probably a language barrier. There's probably a food barrier. If I know her, Brittany likes the good honey bun. You know what I'm saying? Like,
probably no honey buns.
Right, none. Yeah. So, you know, but aside from that, she's one of us. Whether you like what she believes in or how she lives, she is one of us. And we need to take care of one of us. I know I looked at Trevor Reed's interview, like, you know, Trevor Reed doesn't want to leave. It's a Marine essential. You don't leave one man behind. We're leaving her behind. And there are other people that are locked up in, you know, abroad. I don't really know them, but let's pull them all out. Let's all feel good about bringing those that are being detained or arrested in any country wrongfully. Let's bring them home. Let's all hands on deck and act as if this is someone that we've lived with every single day of our lives. And once we're able to equate that with Brittany, then when we put enough pressure on people to move a little bit quicker.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I have to ask you, because you kind of alluded to this. I mean, is Brittany's identity, is that a reason for why she is still being detained, do you think? Is it part of the reason that more people aren't paying attention? I mean, she's obviously a star athlete in her own right, but she's not, you know, one of these men's basketball stars.
Well, I mean, I don't know what it is. I think for me, it's an American. She's an American citizen that's, again, has been deemed wrongfully detained. It could be just a regular American over there. If I knew them, I would be advocating for them, because I wouldn't want anybody to have to endure what she's been enduring for the past 113 days.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I want to close by asking you kind of what is next for you in this fight for gender equality and equity in our country, in your profession. What do you see as the work ahead for you?
I mean, I can only continue to use my voice as a vessel to bring light to it. And I mean, there are a lot of ways. Like, I think my voice is probably the most powerful thing, and then utilizing it on social media and social media outlets. If people want me to be a part of a resolution, a board, or whatever it is, a group of people that could just normalize or give a normalized perspective on just, I mean, on human beings. Like, we're human beings, and it's so hard to comprehend that you are treated differently because of the color of your skin. You're treated differently because of your sexual preference, or anything. Like, I mean, that is so ungodly when you're able to be the judge of someone because of, what they believe in and how they want to live. Like, it's so judgmental of people to be that way. So I'm just gonna try to shed light on this and hopefully change hearts, because that's what it is. You have to change somebody's heart, and that is truly, truly, truly hard to do.
Yeah, well, I know you don't just shed light, you do call it out every time you see it. And that's what makes you a champion, not just on the court, but really in life. And we are so grateful for your insight and your tremendous leadership in sports and beyond. And we know that you're going to be involved in the struggle for equality for all of us. So thank you so much again for being part of this new generation that is helping to make Title IX and gender equality real in this country.
Thank you.
I just always knew that I was capable of pursuing sports because I saw women doing it. Certainly having Title IX and offering me a full athletic scholarship to go to a university like UCLA was incredible. But in saying that, the law has not been followed. And it's like Roe v. Wade. It's like equal pay, the ERA. Does it help women athletes? Absolutely. But I think the young athletes today, they don't know what Title IX is. They don't understand it. 30, 20 years later, they have just been given what they think is equal, which is not equal. And I think that needs to be taught at the AAU level, at the high school level, at the college level. And I think that they need to understand to continue to fight for this law.
Before we get into our next conversation, I want to tell you about a special giveaway happening only during this week's summit. As a huge thank you to the newest members of our community, the 19th membership manager, Serena Henderson, has put together a gift basket with some awesome items, including Jewel's latest album, some very special edition 19th swag, a couple of our favorite books, and more. To be eligible for this special summit giveaway, simply sign up for any one of our 3 free newsletters by the time the summit ends on Friday, June 17th. If you already get our daily or weekly newsletter, consider signing up for email updates about future events to be eligible. You can find details and a sign-up form at 19thnews.org/giveaway or scan the QR code on the screen. We'll announce and email the 2 lucky winners near the end of our summit on Friday. 1 virtual attendee and 1 in-person attendee will be randomly selected. Thank you for arranging that, Serena. Okay, up next, we talk with Paralympic track and field athlete Scout Bassett about finding her purpose when she found running. She'll talk about the need for more opportunities for people with disabilities to try sports and discover their strengths at a young age. The 19th's editor-in-chief, Julia B. Chan, is here to lead the conversation. Julia?
Thanks so much, Amanda. Hi, Scout. It's a thrill and an honor to be chatting with you today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. Well, let's hit the ground running. In past interviews, you've shared that one of the most defining aspects of your childhood was sports. Could you help us set the stage for our conversation and share a bit about that journey with us today?
Yes, so I started in sports at 2nd grade. And for people that don't know my story, I came here through adoption when I was 7 years old. So I obviously don't speak the language, and from China. And I grew up in a town where there weren't a lot of people like me with a disability, being a minority. And sports was something that I felt like would help me transcend a lot of the cultural and social barriers. That really is the beauty of sport, right? It is without a border, so to speak. So I decided to do youth soccer and softball. And what I realized when I started out doing sports, and really would be the continuation throughout grade school and high school, was I was always welcome to be there. So I could come to the games and the practices and the tournaments. But when it came to actually playing in the game, being able to compete, I was largely denied that opportunity. So everybody else got to play, and I was just told that I had to sit on the bench or stand on the sidelines or given other drills or activities to do while everybody else got to compete. And just had such a huge effect on my self-esteem and the way that I looked at people with disabilities. I grew up thinking that people like me didn't belong in the game, didn't get an opportunity to play. And it wasn't obviously until I found Paralympics that really my whole life changed and was able to get a running leg that I was able to be competitive really for the first time.
Thank you for sharing that. I wanted to dig into something that you said at the top around how when you first came to this country, sports seemed like a good way to learn the culture and socialize. And I'm curious, what was your impression of American sports when you got here? What gave you those signals that this was something that you wanted to get into?
Well, that's a great question. Well, actually, to be honest, I didn't know anything about sports before I decided to join. I don't come from a particularly athletic family. Nobody in my family did sports. My parents were not, athletes or anything. They didn't play sports growing up. And so I was only drawn to it because it was the one thing that when I came to school, I just saw so much joy and happiness that my classmates had from doing soccer and softball and these other sports. I didn't even know what it was, but just I want to go and join and participate. And so I just remember that being like something that, okay, it seems like it's fun. And also, it doesn't take place in the classroom, which for me was a natural draw because obviously I don't speak the language very well, and I'm having a hard time connecting and doing well in school academically. So, an activity outside of school just seemed something like I was drawn to and interested in.
That's so insightful to hear because especially not coming from an athletic family, you were able to just infer all of these ways in which the kids at the time around you were deriving joy and finding that you yourself wanted to participate in that, and that this was something that that went beyond language. Yes. In a lot of ways. That's really fascinating to hear. And I always wonder about the cultural aspects of whether or not, because sports is so inundated in our culture on TV, all around us, but you really derived it from direct experience at school.
Yeah, and from the emotions, right? It doesn't matter where you are in this world and what language you speak, you can tell people's emotions from almost any experience just by reading their facial expressions, their body language. And all I got was that whatever this activity was, they were having a lot of fun doing it. And okay, I want to be part of that, to try it. And even though I had never seen either of the sports ever, even on TV or anything.
Thank you for sharing that. The emotional connection that you're describing, I think, speaks to some of the inclusivity that can be generated in sports. But of course, one thing we can talk about is how there can be more inclusivity. I'm curious to hear about what you think inclusivity looks like for people with disabilities in sports, and how you think Title IX, which is, the theme of our summit this week, how do you think Title IX should help with that?
Well, that is another great question. And one of the things for me growing up is, okay, I got to participate in mainstream able-bodied sports at a youth level or a high school level, junior high level. But then after high school, I remember there was a part of me that was so sad when the tennis season was over in the spring, because it was like, well, where do I go from here? I've played sports my whole life, and there's no opportunity for me to continue playing sports beyond this place. And what we know for able-bodied athletes is a lot of times college is really the end of their athletic career, right? Collegiate sports. Well, imagine having a disability where for most of us, it ends at high school, because there is no college level and very few opportunities at the collegiate level. And while there are many programs around this country that have sports for people with disabilities, mostly wheelchair sports. So really just a niche segment, a small segment of the disability population. These sports are mostly club-based. They're or intramural based. They're not affiliated on an NCAA level with the actual university or colleges. So they receive far less funding, support. They don't have the same resources as collegiate able-bodied sports. And so what I really feel like there's an opportunity for Title IX is to serve athletes with disabilities, women athletes with disabilities, where currently at the collegiate level right now, there are virtually little to almost no opportunities. So I'll give you an example. I have a young girl that I'm mentoring right now who's going to go to a Pac-12 school, so a Division I college, and she's going to go play wheelchair basketball as part of their club wheelchair basketball team. And the most that she's going to receive in scholarship money playing for this club program and team is $7,000, which is just, I mean, she's out of state, so she might as well be going to the school and paying her entire way there. But meanwhile, she has the ability and will likely represent our country at the Paralympic Games in wheelchair basketball. So you could win a medal for your country and have to pay your entire way playing that sport through college, which to me is just absolutely bizarre. And why should she be denied the opportunity to earn a full athletic scholarship, just like her able-bodied counterparts? But right now we don't see that. And so, and also the measure that we have with people with disabilities is, well, you can only earn a scholarship if you are able to compete or run or swim or jump at a able-bodied standard. And what we know about is people with disabilities, that standard cannot be the same, because obviously I'm missing my leg from the knee down. I'm above the knee down. I'm never going to be able to run an able-bodied time. And so there's got to be a process, a system in place where you can still have a disability, compete collegiately, and it's not measured in the same criteria as we measure able-bodied performance and results. So that's really where I think there's a huge opportunity that's missed here, because these athletes are incredible. They are going to represent our country. And what we see from Olympic sports is that college is an incredible feeder program for Olympic sports. But at the Paralympic level, college is not a feeder program currently, because there's very little opportunities for these athletes to continue to train, to compete throughout their college years. And so right now we really have not a development program that continues beyond the high school level. And that's something that we have to improve upon, especially as we go to LA 28 and we're looking for a more gender equal Paralympic Games. Currently, the Paralympic Games are not gender equal in terms of participation, and we're really not all that close. So that's something that, you know, it's like if we don't have this platform, this pipeline and space for athletes to continue at a college level, we're not going to see them continue to do sports as they go to school.
I'm curious to pull on a couple of threads there, because you've made so many wonderful points. The college sports system being a feeder to Olympics and not so much to Paralympics. I'm curious, knowing your background and knowing that you were approached while you were at UCLA to explore, you know, whether or not you wanted to compete in the Paralympics. I'm curious, how does your experience is there anything in your experience that encourages you towards the development of a lot in which you described could be better for bringing about more opportunities for folks on the collegiate level?
Well, I'll give you my experience at UCLA, and it was an incredible time and chapter of my life, and I'm so proud to be a Bruin. But one of the things that happened when I was at school is in my sophomore year, I got approached by US Paralympic track and field to, be developed to compete at the Paralympic Games. They were trying to recruit more women, just seeing that the numbers were so low for women in the Paralympics at the time. I come from a triathlon endurance sports background, so obviously they knew I could run, but I had never done track before. We didn't even have a track program in high school when I grew up. And so I didn't really know anything about it, but the opportunity to compete at the Paralympics amongst the very best athletes in the world was very attractive to me. And so I said, well, where do I start? And they said, well, maybe you should try to contact the coaches at UCLA, the track program, and see if you can join or do some workouts, or see if the coach would be willing to work with you, separately on the side. But college is a great place to start. You're in school, they have a very good program. So I went to one of the assistant coaches, and I asked her about, she was the sprints coach, and I asked her if I could train with the team. Obviously, I'm not asking for the same services or benefits because I'm not competing for the school. And obviously, I'm not there on an NCAA scholarship. But she said no, because obviously I'm not part of the program. And obviously, there's other reasons for, legal and liability. And I did understand that. And so it just raised a lot of frustrations for me that here at the time I was aiming for the London 2012 games, but had no place to be able to train and no coaching at that time. So I was doing it all on my own, and I would do it like super early in the morning before the team was out there. And I just started running, but I didn't really know what I was doing. And I will say, since then, the coach has, she knows who I am now and has since apologized, but, she just said, I had no idea I didn't know anything about the Paralympics. She just thought I was a student that was just wanting to, run, work out. And practice time is not workout time for college students, right? And so, but my point is that now I'm in a program where at San Diego State, I train with the team, and I've been able to travel with the team. I'm post-collegiate. I'm now considered professional, but the model that has been created with Coach Sheila Burrell at the university, she's the head women's track coach there, has been a model that I think can really work for a lot of other programs. And I know so many schools or coaches are intimidated by the idea of reinventing the wheel, right? Like, oh, we've got to create a whole program, a whole new thing for athletes with disabilities. And my reply is that it's not as difficult as they might think. How you train an able-bodied athlete, the same kind of workouts, the technique that's required for an able-bodied sprinter to be great is very similar for what I need to do to be great. Obviously, there's going to be modifications and things that will be needed to need to change in order for me to be able to do some of the drills and some of the workouts and whatnot. But it's really not all that different or difficult. And so the idea of integration, I think, is something that can be modeled at many programs across the country. It's not unrealistic to have, one or two athletes with disabilities as part of your able-bodied program. And I think you just need to have leaders, coaches, people that are in levels of authority that have the willingness and the open-minded approach of working with somebody with a disability. And I'm obviously so lucky at San Diego State to have that. But naturally, I do understand that for a lot of college programs, the idea of it can be quite intimidating.
I have to say, your journey of being so driven and so proactive really reveals a lot that can continue to be built programmatically to support people with disabilities, inclusivity in sports, and just really the ways in which we reconsider who we center and who we include in a number of our programs. I think your journey, some of the pain points that you encountered, you've also are helping now to build against, which is really great to hear. We have a couple minutes left here, and I want to go back to something that you touched on that I think is a really important topic for us, which is gender equality at the Paralympics. As you said, historically, there's been a big gender disparity when it comes to competition, with fewer women competing than men. And just to tie things together, your vision for a more inclusive sports environment, one that gets kids, students discovering their strengths at a younger age. Could this be a pathway towards gender equality at the Paralympics? How are you thinking about this?
Absolutely. But not only do we not have a gender equal Paralympic Games in terms of a 50-50 men and women participation, but we don't even have the same number of sports and events for women at the Paralympics as we do for men. So that's obviously very problematic. And I'll give you another example. In my sport alone, track and field, we have 17 fewer, women have 17 fewer events, medal events than men. And that's going to be the program for Paris 2024. And so when people say, well, 17 fewer, okay, times that by 3. That's the number of medal opportunities that women are denied at the Paralympic Games in 2024 in the biggest sport at the Paralympics. And it's not just the medal, but it's the trickle down effect that it has on women. She's denied the opportunity not only and having those 17 fewer events for women, that means that all these women that could have competed in these certain events aren't going to be able to even go to the games, right? So she's not going to have the platform, the opportunity to be on a global stage. It also affects her ability to market herself if she's not given the opportunity to compete at the games, to be more visible, to create PR around the games and disability, and obviously a financial aspect, right? To support herself and if she has a family. So it goes beyond just being denied the opportunity to compete for a medal. It has this very trickle down effect. And so that's something that really concerns me when we look at the Paralympics, and it's sort of the chicken or the egg theory, right? We're told that we don't have as many events because the participation numbers are not there for women in those events. But okay, are the participation numbers not there because you don't even offer it in the first place? So how is a young girl supposed to train for an event that currently isn't even offered at the Paralympics? How is that a motivating factor for her? So it's just really difficult in that sense of, we've got to have the sports and events more equal. And that's something that we need to continue to push for. And as we talked about earlier, okay, well, how do we get participation numbers up? How do we get more women and young girls interested in Paralympic sports and these events within these sports where they cannot be denied? We have the numbers now, right? And so one of the things that I'm really passionate about, and I'm actually have started a fund to specifically support young girls and women that have a passion, that are on the path of elite sports. Because one of the things that I found out was when I started doing Paralympics full-time, pursuing this, I didn't have a single commercial sponsor. Nobody was interested in working and supporting a Paralympic athlete at that time. You just didn't see it on TV or in advertising. And so I was living out of my car, on my friends' couches and spare rooms. And that's how I made it work, because there was just financially wasn't even feasible. And then when you look at the added cost of the adaptive equipment needed to do the adaptive sports, Paralympic sports, the barrier of entry is just enormous. And so I'm hoping that through partners and the organizations that I work with, along with the fund, that we can develop and we can support and fund a talent pool of young women that will be able to compete at future games, and that will help to create more opportunities for women to be able to have to compete in Paralympic sports.
That's really great to hear. I think what you've revealed throughout the conversation are these gaps in opportunities. And one thing that it seems to be surfacing for us is that we need more bridges. And you have just brought up a bridge that you are creating yourself in order to really meet these opportunities, or have girls and women meet these opportunities in a way that you may not have experienced, but your experience informs the ways in which that this can really shape up. So thank you so much for sharing that with us today.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Scout. This was such a wonderful conversation. It's been great to spend some time together, and it's just been an honor.
It's great to talk to you. Thank you so much for having me and shining light on these issues and ways that we can progress forward through Title IX.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julia and Scout. Now, it's my honor to introduce a performance by singer, songwriter, producer, and my dear friend, Amalia Mondragon.
My name is Amalia Mondragon, and this is Te Diré. Mi nombre es Amalia Mondragon, y esta canción se llama Te Diré. Siento la vida tan seca, pienso que no puedo más. Canto hacia el cielo y no escucha nadie nada, y sigue igual, cantando los pajarillos, cantando a mi alrededor. Yo puesta en un paraíso y sin nadie, ay, qué dolor. Y te diré que no pienso en ti, te diré que no vives en mí, te diré que no tomo por ti, te diré. Y te diré que no pienso en ti, te diré que no vives en mí, te diré que no lloro por ti. Hoy te diré siento en el alma un vacío, uno que no puedo llenar. Tus alas se han extendido hacia el cielo para volar, y aunque tu amor no regrese, yo siempre te calmaré, porque el amor de mi vida fue lo que fue en el ayer. Y te diré que no pienso en ti, te diré que no vives en mí, te diré que no tomo por ti, te diré Hoy te diré.
Thank you, Amalia, for that beautiful performance. Next up, we are going to dig into equality in STEM, the fields of science, technology, engineering, and math. Let's begin with a conversation on how early investments in STEM programming can close the gender gap with Tarika Barrett, CEO of Girls Who Code. The 19th's education reporter, Nadra Niddle, is here to lead this conversation. Nadra?
Thanks, Amanda. And thank you, Dr. Barrett, for being here today. I really appreciate you taking the time to be with us to discuss the gender gap in STEM. And I'd like to start off, just asking you about this trend we've heard for years now, that in the younger years, so in elementary school or so, we hear that girls do seem to be interested in STEM subjects and, have confidence. And then for some reason around middle school and definitely by high school, that starts to change. And I was wondering if you could talk about, why you think that is and how maybe even girls of color in particular might be especially at risk.
Nadra, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. And that is such an important question. At Girls Who Code, we are committed to closing the gender gap in technology. But for us, it's so much more than just teaching girls computer science or addressing issues of equity in the workplace. It's about changing a culture that tells our girls, our young women, our students who identify as non-binary, that they don't belong in tech. And for us, it's very much about really getting through to them that they deserve to have a seat at the table. And, as you think about this work, so much of it is that our girls, even before the age of 10, are internalizing these cultural touchstones around what a computer scientist looks like. And these internalized beliefs stick with them and they resonate, their entire lives. So elementary school, middle school, college, even into the workforce. And you talked about this age, Nadra, in terms of when we see this happen. And the data tell us that somewhere between the ages of 13 and 17, what we call the middle school cliff, we see this drop off. It's when the weight of society's assumptions around identity and intelligence begin to coalesce and chip away at a girl's sense of what's possible. And that leads, frankly, to seeing lower rates of, advanced placement computer science course taking and test taking. And we also see really, abysmal numbers in the college space, with only 19% of women graduating with a degree in the field. And at the core of it is that we always say to Girls Who Code, you can't be what you can't see. And our little girls are inundated with, Neil Armstrong and Albert Einstein and Steve Jobs and Mark Zuckerberg, but they don't hear about Katherine Johnson or Mary Jackson or Ada Lovelace or Grace Hopper or Jean Bartik. And so at Girls Who Code, for us, it's about shifting that cultural narrative that says that they don't get a seat at the table. That's why we've done things like create a book series, aimed at babies through middle schoolers. Or if you think about this incredible campaign we launched last year called Make That Change, with a powerful new message for girls and young women, that when you pursue a career in tech, you're not just changing, your community or the world, you can change your own personal professional trajectory and your financial trajectory. Because let's face it, our young women and girls are dynamic, they're passionate, they're creative. They're going to be these change agents. And that's why it's so critical that we really get at culture way beyond just teaching girls computer science.
Yeah, no, thank you for answering that. That was really insightful. And one thing I just want to follow up on, you mentioned women like Katherine Johnson and others. And so I was wondering if you can discuss the film Hidden Figures and what kind of cultural impact, that film made on girls and girls of color in particular.
Yeah, and I am so happy that I don't think anyone has ever asked me that question, so I love it. That when I saw it, even if I think about my 13-year-old daughter and what it meant for her to see these incredibly powerful, Black women on the screen who frankly put, our space program on the map at a time when they couldn't even drink from the communal water fountain. And it has taken, 7 decades essentially for them to get their due, to be recognized. And yes, I'm so elated that we now have a NASA spacecraft that bears the name, the SS Katherine Johnson, and this huge building in DC dedicated to Mary Jackson. But one of the pitfalls is that, they resemble the girls we work with every day. They were right there. We're calling them hidden figures, but they were plotting and calculating and doing the work like we see our Black and brown girls doing every day. And it's so easy to overlook them. But one of the things that's so powerful about that film as well is exactly that first question that you asked me, representation in tech for our girls, young women, non-binary students, to see them is absolutely critical because these media messages mean something. There's so many other examples, Nadra, when you think about the Hunger Games and Brave that both, featured women using bow and arrows. Guess what? There was a 50% increase in the number of girls pursuing archery. So as much as you don't think about it, what we do depends a lot on what we see. So we can never minimize that having a film that celebrates and, calls out these accomplishments can have an exponential impact. So thank you so much for asking that question.
Yeah, no, thank you for answering that. And I would love to also hear a little bit about your own experience. Tell me about, what it was like for you growing up, and then how this led you, to make STEM the focus of your career.
Thank you for asking that question. I am so proud to be sitting here now, CEO of Girls Who Code, focused on closing the gender gap in tech. But, I'm also, Jamaican American, the proud daughter of immigrants, a Black woman and an educator. And all of those perspectives shape how I approach my work. I stand on the shoulders of generations of inspiration, the women who got me to where I am today, as well as the girls and young women who continue to inspire me to fight for a brighter future. And, my grandmother actually had to drop out of school and work on the family farm in Jamaica after her mother had passed away, helping to raise her 7 younger siblings. And even though her education had been cut short, she understood that it could pry open the doors of opportunity. And that's a notion that she passed on to her children, all the way down to me. And, I also had a mom who really encouraged me to go into spaces, to embrace my own agency and know that I could be the change that I wanted to see. And to your specific question of how did I get here doing this work? I've really devoted my entire career to addressing issues of equity in education, but it was when I had a chance to work at the New York City Department of Education where a lot of this really crystallized for me. I had a chance to work with students who were significantly off track academically with very little chance of graduating on time. Most of them were poor Black and brown kids who looked, just like me when I was growing up. And my job was to help get them back on track with things like transfer schools, GED programs, other programs. But our team also was charged with designing new schools, right? To develop skills or to cultivate, things that employers were looking for. And as it happened, Nadra, one of these schools was going to be a first of its kind high school focused on software engineering. And it was going to be a part of the mayor's plan to make New York City a tech hub. But it was also potentially going to be what we called a quote unquote screen school, which would mean that only certain kids, they would have to test in to get accepted. Mm-hmm. Now, as an educator, I knew that relying solely on test scores was going to put kids of color at a disadvantage. So as hard as it was, I, fought against screening and rallied support to open that school to any kid interested in learning computer science. And, it wasn't easy. There were definitely some thinly veiled conversations about whether or not Black and Brown kids could even learn to code. But I'm happy to report that today, that school, the Academy for Software Engineering, is real. And for the kids who are there, 95% of them are graduating on time. And, that was one of my proudest accomplishments as an educator, but it was also a lesson in how critical it is that we exist at that intersection of bravery and opportunity, and that we disrupt the status quo anytime we're given that chance. And so that experience was definitely part of what drove me to be CEO of Girls Who Code. And I knew that the gender gap, closing that was possible. Equity in education is possible. And I knew that I had to be a part of that change.
Yeah. No, thanks for, talking about your own experiences. And, since you mentioned your role in the development of this school, I was also wondering how important it is in terms of closing this gender gap in STEM. Is it for students to have math teachers, science teachers, technology teachers, et cetera, who look like them? I'll just share my own K through 12 experience. I think I had one Black math teacher, and that might have been it for my entire K through 12 experience. One Black woman math teacher.
Yeah, no, and Natra, what you're talking about is at the core of what we're grappling with. Like, you're saying that now, right? As a successful, professional. My children are 13 and 15, and neither of them have ever had a Black male teacher, for example. And, certainly that's true in terms of the tech sector. As much as we feel that we've had an outsized impact as an organization, we're still talking about an industry, for example, where only 26% of it is made up of women. And when you talk about Black and Latinx women, it's only 5%. And so much of that is also reflected in terms of what we see within the education sphere. And everything I just said about, it's very hard for girls and young women to see themselves in the sector if they don't have these salient role models. It's one of the reasons as an organization that Girls Who Code has created, for example, Women in Tech Spotlights, featuring women, and especially women of color, who are making a change in the tech sector, who are technologists in STEM, computer scientists, because it is so critical. And so much of what we do at Girls Who Code is also, in addition to teaching computer science, changing that cultural narrative. Like, if you think about last year, this one thing we did that actually gave me credibility with my teenage kids was partnering with Doja Cat on Doja Code, which was, they were like, Doja Cat, Mom. Okay, all of a sudden they cared about what I did, which was phenomenal. But Doja Code was the world's first ever codable music video, and you could go into that. It was for her hit, viral sensation Woman, and you could change the color of her nails, you could change the background, you could have her vanish into thin air. And so much of that work was also making sure that our girls, and especially our Black and Brown girls, and our students who are the most marginalized and historically underrepresented in tech, that they begin to see that their creativity, their passion, their interests can be brought to this field, and that they could see themselves as technologists. So I feel like we have to come at this, Nadra, from a number of perspectives, from the education sphere, from the tech sector itself, because that absolutely has to change. And that's why we have programming, free after school clubs that very much predominantly happen in schools, where any teacher can lead. And that means that we're going to have a diverse group of people who are learning alongside our girls as they encounter these Women in Tech Spotlights and they learn to code. We also have summer programming that, again, also exposes these students to all of these female role models. And so we have programming that gets to this community at every stage of the pipeline, because we know how important it is that we really change how diversity looks within the sector.
Yeah, definitely. And I also want to hear a little bit about, students who maybe they're interested in coding or other STEM fields, but they feel at heart more like, they're artists or a human person, not tech people. there a way, to merge those interests? I mean, you mentioned a Doja Cat video.
Yes.
I also know there's schools that aren't just STEM schools, they're STEAM schools. So they are kind of, trying to reach out to that other population.
Absolutely.
So can you talk about that?
No, such a great question. And we find that our alums, for example, girls and young women students who participated in our programming, they often, let's say they're pursuing computer science or coding directly, or they might be doing things that are tech adjacent. What you're hitting, on is so critical because it is that creativity that we absolutely have to bring, that artistic sense to the sector, because it is woefully not representing the needs of so many communities. And so, I'll point to a couple of examples. While they're not within the art sphere, they're so critically important just for us as humans. We know that there's no opting out of tech anymore, right? Tech intersects every aspect of our lives: voting rights, healthcare, criminal justice system. And, not too long ago, a New Jersey man was wrongfully accused of a crime because facial recognition software wrongfully identified him as a perpetrator. This person was in jail, but it could have escalated and ended up in something far worse. And you think about another example in the health sector, where the first iteration of Apple's health app had nothing around menstruation or fertility. Had we had women at the table, that would have never happened. So Nadra, I offer these examples, right? And even if you think about, Doja's incredible video and what it looks like, without our voices, without our influence, we are missing out on, frankly, creating products that actually meet the needs of our community. And I think those are artistic products. I think they're healthcare focused. I think they're safety, their well-being, they're everything that you can imagine. And if that doesn't convince our young people, they need to remember that STEM jobs pay 26% more than other jobs. They are the fastest growing, highest paying sector in our economy. And we can't afford to have our young people left behind. So that's part of what we are so deeply committed to at Girls Who Code, in terms of reminding them that you can be amazing in tech. You can bring everything, all the magic to this sector. And we need them, frankly, desperately, because of the products we know fall short of what they should be.
Yeah. And now I kind of want you to just maybe brag about yourself a little bit about Girls Who Code, in the sense that I feel like now there is a movement basically to really get girls into STEM subjects, whether it's technology, whether it's math, whether it's science. I know about, at this point, several organizations that are really aimed at getting girls some sort of enrichment that they don't get in their normal school day, to really make them more interested in these subjects and to expose them to more subjects. So with that, I'm wondering if you can discuss how influential you think Girls Who Code has been, and if you think we are kind of in this movement now nationally to really get girls to pursue these subjects.
Yeah, absolutely. Since our founding in 2012, we've reached 500,000 students with our programming. 115,000 are college and workforce age young women. And you talk about a movement. We're absolutely leading that movement to inspire and educate and equip students who identify as girls or non-binary with these critical computing skills to take on 21st century opportunities. And, for us, by addressing this growing gender gap in tech, we're preparing, as I shared with you, our young people for these thriving and exciting careers of the future. I think that there very much is a movement underfoot to really expand computer science and to ensure, because it is as necessary and as basic, I think, as any other core subject, academic subject, that kids are exposed to currently. And I think that Girls Who Code has been at the forefront of that movement, both in sort of defining the issue and the gap and sort of saying, hey, folks, pay attention to this, but absolutely in terms of the, frankly, hundreds of thousands of girls and young women that we've taught, computer science, but almost equally critically, the fact that the representations we see today be it on Netflix, other channels, other places where now coding is in the lexicon. We absolutely take credit for that in terms of shifting the narrative and making sure that girls don't think twice when they see someone cast as a coder or recognize, these incredible women making a dent in the field. And yes, we still have a far way to go, but the work underway is so vital. So I'm really proud of that.
Thank you. Yeah. And in closing, you mentioned having teenage children yourself, and you mentioned what the future might possibly look like. And I'm wondering if you can, close discussing that. So by the time, should you become a grandmother at some point, what are you hoping things look like for girls and women in STEM for future generations?
Yeah, I mean, our vision is very much that our computer science classrooms, resemble the diverse communities that we come from, that we build this incredible sisterhood of women in tech that women everywhere can lean on, and that this sisterhood in turn will translate into meaningful change for communities in the entire world. So I anticipate that our girls and young women and students who identify as non-binary are going to be the future leaders in tech, and that they're going to, help solve our problems and lead the way around so many issues that we're grappling with today.
Yeah. Well, is there anything else you would like our audience to know that I have not brought up about this gender gap in STEM?
Yeah, I mean, I'll make a very blatant plug for our programming. Please visit us at girlswhocode.com. Our programming is aimed at third grade all the way through the workforce. We always say to, if you have a girl in your life, encourage her to consider pursuing computer science, coding. We have our free after school clubs. Our summer immersion programming is about to kick off. We have college loops on campuses across the country, and we've just, started to engage young women in terms of workforce development. So we know that there are rich opportunities for your community listening to engage in what we're doing and to join our movement.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Nadra and Tarika, for that insightful discussion. Now, we move on to higher education and career advancement. Joining us are Kate Calvin, Chief Scientist and Senior Climate Advisor with NASA, and Maria Clave, President of the Harvey Mudd College, which has one of the top engineering programs in the world. The 19th economy reporter, Chibeli Garrasana, is here to explore the fight for gender parity and equitable leadership in STEM fields. Chibeli?
Well, thank you so much, Amanda. And Maria and Kate, it's a pleasure to have you both with us. Thanks so much for doing this. I wanted to start, I think most folks have an origin story for how they got into the field that they're in. And I'm really interested in people who, went to work in fields where they were underrepresented, where you're not seeing people like you, where, girls are less likely to turn to STEM jobs as they progress, the older they get in their educations. And so I'd love to hear from both of you briefly how you got started. Maria, maybe if you want to start, what got you interested in pursuing mathematics, computer science, despite very few women choosing that path at the time?
Well, I think part of it was that I grew up thinking I was a boy, and I played the trumpet. I didn't like dolls or nice dresses or anything like that. My father thought I was his son to the extent that the first time I was pregnant, he looked at me and said, "That's not physically possible." And so the fact that I liked math and art and music, he just encouraged that. And in fact, I actually signed up to study engineering when I started university, but because I thought it was a way of combining math and science and art. But I switched the day before classes started because as I was registering, they told me that engineers weren't allowed to take the top math classes, and I wanted to be in the honors math classes. And so that's how I ended up in mathematics. And I will say that over and over again, my professors, who are all male, would say to me, "Maria, why do you want to be a female mathematician? There aren't any great female mathematicians." And of course, that made me want to do mathematics more than I had before. So that's how that happened.
That's really interesting. And I think as we look at what's happened over time too, the number of women getting computer science, like for example, computer science degrees, has really sort of gone through this period of where it's changed a lot. It was increasing a little bit in the late 90s, early 2000s when you were going to school, Kate, and now it's dropped off a little bit again in the mid 1980s. It peaked, and so it's really moved over time. I'm wondering, Kate, what your origin story is. Why you chose this path, and what made you stick with it despite some of the barriers that Maria laid out?
Yeah, so I when I was in high school, I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. I just knew I liked math. And I was fortunate I had a high school calculus teacher who was a woman, and she was very encouraging. So when I was looking into college, I just declared math as a major. And when I got there, I took a computer science class and thought that was really fun. So I declared that as a second major. I didn't really get into, my expertise is in climate change. And so I started doing that in grad school. And that was sort of a combination of loving being outside and having this math, computer science, technical background. And so for me, climate change was a way to bring those together. But I'd say I've been really fortunate all along that I've always been able to see senior women in the field, whether it was my high school calculus teacher or people throughout my graduate school or professional career. And they've shown me an example of what that might look like. And so I think I was very fortunate there.
Yeah, I'm glad you're bringing that up because, pipeline is such a huge part of this, right? And I know, Maria, there are probably a few people who understand this as well as you do. At Harvey Mudd, about half of computer science, engineering, and physics majors are women, which is an astronomical statistic when you consider, nationally, only about 20% computer science majors are women. And like I said, that's a number that's actually been shrinking over time. Being able to see people in higher positions in the field is something that is relatively new. I know, Maria, you've talked a little bit before about how there were a number of even cultural barriers you had to overcome, combating ideas, people saying, well, if you accept more women or people of color, you're lowering standards at the school. How did you combat something as deeply ingrained as that? And what initiatives did you take on that you credit as being the most impactful?
Well, yes, we certainly have had people say, including alumni, that we must be lowering the standards because we've got so many women and so many people of color. The reality is that when I arrived, we were admitting 37% of the people who applied. And now we're admitting around 12 or 13% of the people who apply. So I can tell you that the standards have not been lowered at all. But it's definitely true that we need to change a lot of things, because if you've been largely white and male for most of your existence, Mudd was founded in 1955, first students arrived in 1957, and the vast majority of the students were white and male for probably the first 30 years. So there will be lots of things in your culture that privilege white males and do the opposite to people who are not white and male. And so one of the things we've had to do is really think about how we teach and what we teach. And I think one of the biggest changes, which was actually done by the computer science department the year before I arrived. So, and done very deliberately to attract more women to major in computer science, was to change the intro course so that there was one section for the students who'd never written a line of code, and another section for students who'd done something like an AP course in computer science, both called CS5. So our colors are gold and black, and the one for people who'd never written a line of code was CS5 gold, and black was for the people who had an extra, who'd had some programming experience in computer science before that. And then we also added another section called CS42, which was for the people who'd been programming since they were 12 or 3 or whatever. And we worked very hard to make sure that all of the sections were a lot of fun, but also that if you took black or gold, you were not privileged when you started the next course in the series, which is CS60. And for CS42, it combines 5 and 60. And so we didn't have to worry about those students interacting with the students who'd never had any computer science before they came to college until they got to their third course in the series. We did lots of other things. So we started taking large numbers of female students to the Grace Harper Conference for Women in Computing. We also encouraged tech companies to give them internships after their first year, not just the female students, but actually all students, because we know that being able to see concepts used in real life increases retention for women and for people of color, and probably actually for white males as well. So I just lots and lots of changes to help everybody feel like they belong and that they are going to thrive so long as they actually work hard and get help.
I love those examples because they speak to, what I think is one of the larger barriers, which is access. If you haven't had access to this kind of education in the past, you might feel discouraged to continue on. And so I love that example of how you all separated the course to encourage folks to just come, if they're interested, come and try it and see how it goes. I'm curious what you think, Kate, having entered the field in the last 20, 30 years, you get a sense that there are shifts happening from when you were a student in the early 2000s to now as you look at scientists coming up in NASA?
Yeah, I've definitely seen an increase in female participation in meetings and other events that I've done. There's a part of that that's probably a passage of time. There's a part where I went from being, a pure math and computer science in undergrad to something very interdisciplinary now. But there are more and more women that I'm seeing in meetings, and it's really helpful. I think, again, the feeling of belonging and seeing people that look like you is really important. And I also just want to echo what Maria just said. I think it's really important to recognize that, not everybody is starting from the same spot. And so that sort of first level of intro is really important. And I've experienced this a lot in interdisciplinary work. When you walk in and you talk to someone that's from a different background than you, the first day is really just about vocabulary and language and making sure you're using the same words. And then you can hit the ground running and really appreciate what everyone brings to the table. But there's a part of it that's just making sure we're on the same page, making sure people are being heard, and making sure everyone feels like they belong.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think that's a great point. I also want to acknowledge that there's still a lot of friction points. For example, Harvey Mudd has obviously made huge strides, and some institutions have followed suit, have made changes, but there is still really a long way to go to reach parity. The only STEM field where women outnumber men is in sort of the healthcare field. And even there, they're more likely to be in lower paying jobs. And after the pandemic, many are actually exiting the field, in part because of a lack of support for care responsibilities as well. Women today are about 47% of mathematicians, 40% of physical scientists, and just 15% of engineers. So I think there's still a long way to go. And Maria, I'm curious what your thoughts are on why, with so much attention on this issue over time, are we still a little stuck?
Well, I'm going to focus on computer science and electrical engineering, mechanical engineering for right now. And part of this is that there has been the tech industry has created a huge demand in these areas. And over the pandemic, that demand just grew, whereas the demand lessened in lots of other areas. And so there's been a huge influx of people wanting to major, particularly in computer science and data science. And one of the unfortunate things is that many institutions, when they have to deal with that increased demand, they put in place controls to control the demand that tend to discourage women and people of color. So for example, if I put in a GPA control that says you only get to major in computer science if you have A's in your first two classes, this is going to sound ridiculous, but it's just true that it will discourage more women and people of color than white and Asian males. And I mean, we just know from research that if a woman who was getting A's got an A-, she will just decide that she doesn't really belong there. Whereas a guy who's been getting B+ or B-, he will assume the reason that he's not getting A's is because the prof is not very good or the TA is not very good. I mean, it's just sort of crazy. So it's clear that if we change how we teach and if we create supportive environments, that women and people of color will thrive. And we just need to do more of that at many more institutions. Now, one thing I want to say to Kate, which I think she will love, is we're very interested in climate change research and education at MUD. And we are starting joint majors between math and computer science and climate science. And we think that it's going to be just that much more interesting to women and people of color, because understanding how you can use math and computer science to actually positively influence the direction of the planet doesn't get much better than that.
So that sounds fantastic. We need more people that have the technical skills to bring to climate change.
Oh yeah, and of course, as we've seen, there's a lot of gender implications as well with climate change. We have a climate and gender reporter who covers this area, and it's I think something where the connections between the impact on your communities, for example, women are leaders in their communities oftentimes, particularly women of color, and those connections seem to be really important. So I love that you mentioned that, Maria, and that y'all are thinking about that. I also wanted to talk about something that Kate mentioned a little bit earlier, which was seeing yourself represented in the workforce. It's a big thing that we've talked about for a long time. I was talking to Kate earlier, and I mentioned, I was a space reporter before I started this job. And one of the biggest stories to emerge in the past couple of years has been the amount of women that have been elevated to really prominent positions at NASA for the first time, and at other space organizations. We have the first woman leading a human spaceflight program. We have a mission to put the first woman on the moon. We have, like I said, women leading several major private companies. You're the fifth woman to serve as the chief scientist, Kate. And we know broadly why representation is important, but there are also smaller things, right? Not being the only woman in a meeting, not being, having mentors who can help guide you, getting equal access to promotions. So I was hoping you can point to how some of these changes that NASA is undertaking externally are filtering into the culture internally.
Yeah, so I think first of all, it's, inclusivity is a really big priority at NASA, and listening to everyone. And one of the things that I have noticed throughout my career is that, making a space for people to share. So often if you just have a meeting that's just free form conversation, there's a small number of voices that tend to dominate. They're more confident people, and a lot of other people that have really amazing ideas don't really always shine through. And I think building a community and a meeting structure that enhances inclusivity is really important. And a lot of the meetings I attend are like that, where everyone has an opportunity to say what they think, whether it's your area of expertise or not. We want to hear that. And I think part of it is, if you look at the kinds of work that NASA does, you can't build a rocket or go to the moon without a big team. And the more perspectives you can hear on that, the better the science is, the better that we are. And so I think that's really important. But there's also small things. So one of the things that I really like that NASA has put out recently is we have a graphic novel about a little girl that goes to the moon, and just sort of putting out that information and showing people, this could be you. I think that's really important to see yourself in possible future careers is really important. And so that's been really exciting here to see.
Wow, that sounds fantastic. I just want to say that our view book for MUD this year is a graphic novel.
Oh, that's great.
The end thing.
Yeah, maybe y'all should talk to each other after this, see how you can do more graphics work. I also really want to acknowledge, that of course we still, again, there are a number of areas where we're still, a lot of work can still be done, in particular when we're talking about women of color, LGBTQ plus folks, people who are really underrepresented in many of these fields. Maria, I was hoping you could talk to a little bit more about what Harvey Mudd has been doing recently to attract students from diverse backgrounds, and how do you think those initiatives could translate to the professional workforce?
Well, the first thing I want to say is, I've been at Mudd for 16 years, and when I arrived, we were about 30% female in the student body, about less than 1% Black in the student body, and about 5% Hispanic. And the numbers today are obviously 50% female, and including across all disciplines, over 20% Hispanic, and our incoming class this year and last year was about 25%. And in the last 2 years, we've seen a really major increase in Black students as well. So last year, we were maybe 8.4% officially African American, according to government data, but government, you don't get to count multiracial students as Black. And so if we count multiracial students who present as Black as well, we're about 17.7% last year. And this year, I think we're over 15%, maybe 7.6 for the government number. So those are huge increases. And, it's of course not enough to get them in the door. It's really important that you manage to create a welcoming environment where everyone feels a sense of belonging. So we've been working really hard on that. And probably my favorite comment from this year was a meeting I had with a Black first-year student and a Latinx first-year student. And their comment about MUD was, they're saying, at MUD, you can hang out with everyone. In our high schools, where you had to hang out with students of the same ethnic background. And by the way, happy birthday to your puppy.
He was going to do it at some point. He was going to make himself known.
For sure.
Students were able to share with people from their own background.
Well, so, what they were telling me is, if you're Black, you can hang out with other Black kids, or with other white students, or with other Latinx students, or with gay students, or trans students. It's a very, very welcoming, supportive community. And that's taken a lot of work. I don't want to say change is hard wherever you do it, but it's made a big difference.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that is really important. I'm curious how you think about that as well, Kate. You mentioned your work is really interdisciplinary. You're working with different areas at NASA at all times and different teams. And how do you think about representation and access and opportunity when you're working with these teams, when you're building a team? How does that play out for you?
For me, it's really thinking about creating a space where people feel welcome, just as Maria was mentioning, and trying to break down those barriers. And again, like in an interdisciplinary, or for anyone that's new, it's, things that make it hard to engage are things that, things like acronyms or words we don't understand. And so trying to sort of, make sure we're all speaking the same language to start, creating spaces where people do feel like they have the ability to contribute and that their voices are heard, and acknowledging those. And I think also mentorship is just really important. And so, having peer mentors and people that are more senior than you that help you figure out your way in the new world, I think is really important as you're getting engaged and belonging and trying to find your way forward in a new field or in a new environment.
I'm wondering if there were experiences that both of you had that come to mind as, this is the thing that I want to avoid. This is the thing that I want us to move away from. Experiences that stick out in your mind as moments that were, difficult as women in your respective fields, that, you've sort of taken some lessons from and maybe are thinking about as you move forward. I wonder if there's anything that sticks out in your mind.
I'll give you one from probably around 1998, 1999. And I had just been elected to the council of ACM, the Association for Computing Machinery, which is the lead sort of professional computer science association in the United States and Canada. And they were talking about a conference that was going to happen in 2001, which was going to be across all areas of computer science. And there was a group of people who were organizing it, and they had a list of names of speakers. And there were, let's say, 40 names on the list. How many women do you think were on that list? Zero. And so I asked the obvious question, which was, why aren't there any women on that list? And I got the standard answer, which is, oh, well, there just aren't women who are at this level of, like leadership and seniority in the field. And because I've been doing this for a very long time, I of course was able to say, well, yes, what about, and give them a list of 15 names. And they were sort of, well, one thing that came out of that was I was asked to run for the vice president position of ACM in the next election. Of course, we did end up with a bunch of speakers that was much more representative than the original list, but it's just so common. I've had this happen over and over and over again, that I'm presented with a list that is supposed to be the obvious people we'd invite or consider for some distinguished position, and they're either, out of, let's say, 40 names, there are either 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4 women on the list. And I've just learned that you always have to have a list of members of underrepresented groups. So now I have a list of Black people and a list of brown people, as well as women. I'm sure Kate has had similar experiences.
Yeah, one that stands out for me, this is probably, early in my career, I went to a meeting where I was the only woman, and it was probably 40 or 50 men in the room. And I actually didn't notice initially. They were all very, welcoming. I felt like my voice was heard. And then someone pointed out to me that I was the only woman in the room. And it was that moment that I'm like, now I'm uncomfortable. And what I realized when I think back on it is, I don't think that person was ill-intentioned at all. I think from their perspective, it was just an observation. But for me, it highlighted how I was different than everyone else in a way that maybe I didn't want to highlight. Maybe I wanted to just be another scientist in the room. And so I think that part of what I took from that is, I don't always think people are ill-intentioned. I think they're just not always aware of how people hear what they say. And so that I've always tried to give people the benefit of the doubt, but it does sort of highlight that awareness is a gap right now in terms of inclusivity.
So I have another example, if I can add it. So, and I'm sure Kate has had this experience as well. You're the only woman in the room, or you're one of 2 out of 15 or whatever. And you say something, and there's a group discussion about something or other, and you say something and nobody hears it. And then a little bit later, somebody else says the same thing. And a male says the same thing, of course it's heard. So I came up with a strategy that works really well for this. I will admit that now that I'm older and I have, hair that's almost white, it happens, and I'm better known now, it happens less often. But the following works. Pick a buddy who's male, and just ahead of time, and just ask him to repeat whatever you say if it's not heard. And then when it gets heard, your buddy says, oh yeah, Maria said it first. And it's funny, like it's not, it raises awareness, but it doesn't cause, I think what Kate said is super important. We're all raised in a gendered and racist society, and we all come with biases. And most of the time it is not deliberate at all. So it's just helpful to have a sense of humor.
The ingenuity, the degrees sometimes we have to go to find ways to make this work and to be heard, right? And so I thank you both for sharing both of those stories. I wanted to bring us to the current last couple of years in the pandemic. I think that's something that we certainly need to talk about. The past 2 years have exposed, many of these fractures that we've been talking about in the field, and particularly when we talk about lack of care infrastructure support for women in all fields that are dominated by men, but certainly STEM. And there was a study, I think, that was published last year that found that women in academic STEM fields were facing increased isolation that was limiting their ability to collaborate with colleagues and progress in their careers. They were disproportionately affected by remote work and about gendered expectations around caregiving. We know that women have a harder time progressing in careers because of these expectations that are set on them, and have oftentimes less access to promotions as a result. And so I'm wondering, for you both, have you seen some of these long-term implications of the pandemic begin to play out? And can you point to any places where you think the pandemic might actually help shepherd in some change in terms of reshaping some of these long-held notions and expectations in the field, which oftentimes is kind of some of the stuff under the surface that is blocking women from progressing in their fields?
One of the things that I thought was very interesting was that our students actually did better during the year that education was entirely online. And and this is for both male and female students. And I credit this to a couple of things. One is that our faculty was absolutely extraordinary in terms of moving online learning online with almost no warning. And also I want to credit the Center for Teaching and Learning at the Claremont Colleges, because they were really helpful in helping faculty figure out how to take things and put them online. But I would say the other thing was that there were fewer distractions. And we also found out that more students were likely to go to office hours. It's just really interesting because it was completely effortless. And so, on the other hand, I will say that we have a lot of young faculty with small children. About 40% of our faculty are female, which is pretty high for a STEM institution like Mudd. And there's just no question that caregiving was hard for all of our faculty with young children. And I mean, the other thing that I would say now is that when we look at our first year students who did their last year of high school online, particularly for students from lower income families, their preparation is just not great. And we need to invest a lot of resources to helping them get through we are investing a lot of resources to helping them get through this year. But I mean, I think we're going to see across society, we're going to see a generation of students who were disadvantaged by doing anything in K through 12 education during the pandemic.
That's a great point. Yeah, I think we've certainly seen, some of those barriers to access really play out during the pandemic, both in the education and in the professional workforce as well. Do you have any thoughts on that, Kate? Have you seen any changes within your workforce as a result of the pandemic, responding to some of the needs that folks had?
Well, I would say one thing I've noticed both, in my previous role and here is sort of, I think we're more recognizing that people are different. People need different things to motivate, different things to be productive and focused. There are some people that need engagement with other people in order to really be at their best. Others need to, quiet. And I think the pandemic sort of enabled that. And so I think that was something for me, is that not everyone's the same, and recognizing that. I would also say one of the things I've noticed is about science conferences. And so there's, I think, positive and negative that have come out of the pandemic. On the negative side, we're missing this in-person interaction and networking, which can be really important for career development, particularly for early careers. The ability to meet senior scientists and engage with them is really important, and we're not getting that with virtual conferences. But on the other hand, there's a lot of people that have been able to participate in virtual conferences that may not have been before, either because they didn't have the financial resources or family situations didn't allow them to travel, and they can now participate remotely. And I think that that's a real benefit. If we can find a way to continue to facilitate that process, I think that would be good. And then just on another note, I actually have really appreciated in the pandemic that we see people's pets and kids on the screen. Like, I think it makes us more human, and I think you're more likely to relate to people and hear people if you see them as a person, not just as a worker. And so I've really appreciated that.
Well, my dog just heard you, and he's very happy that you said that. Flynn is very pleased with that comment. He's my little partner during the days now. So finally, I wanted to wrap this up asking you both about your vision for Parity in STEM. Obviously, we've laid out what some of the existing barriers are, what some of the strides have been, and certainly it seems like I said, I think there's still ways to go. And I think you're both are great examples of folks in that space that are starting to change some of those expectations. I'm wondering if you could tell me one big thing and one small thing that you think could move the needle.
Oh, I hate to say this because I've been saying it now for like 40 years, but I would just love for there to be a sitcom on TV with engineers who are people who have a life, who have kids, who have romantic partners, and who are all genders and races.
That I again, speaking to the ingenuity piece there, I love that idea. Is there smaller things that you would like to see happen?
I think more diverse faculty in STEM areas makes a huge difference. It's certainly helped us a lot. It matters a lot that you see people like Kate's math teacher. And by the way, my advanced math, we didn't have calculus in high school when I was in 12th grade, but my advanced math teacher was female. I was the only female in the class, and she teased all the boys because I always got 100% and the class average was 44% or whatever.
Or whatever. She doesn't remember exactly what it was. Something around there. What about you, Kate? What's your big vision and your small vision?
I guess my big is something very similar. I want people to be able to see themselves in the roles that they might want, and that to not be a barrier. And I think a sitcom is a great way to do that, but there's probably others as well. But something where, if a little girl in middle school is thinking about where they might go, that they see people that look like them and all the possibilities, and that's not a barrier. In terms of something smaller, I think more mentorship. Like, I just think it's really important both to have someone that more senior than you that you can talk to and look up to and figure out how they did what they did. And then also someone that's your peer that can sort of relate on a day-to-day basis. I think it's just if we could facilitate that a little bit more and make sure people have someone to talk to.
Well, thank you both for that and for your insight. It sounds like some of these big buckets that could really use, a little bit of help continue to be, I think, at the forefront of what we want to focus on with STEM and with the future of STEM. And I think with the pandemic, we'll still see sort of the effects of that play out over time. So I'm curious to see how that plays out. But thank you both for your time, for your insight, for your ideas, big and small. Me and Flynn down here are really happy to get to talk to you today.
Thank you
so much.
And nice to meet you, Kate.
Yes, nice to meet you.
Thank you, Chibeli. Scientists who are women, people of color, or part of the LGBTQ+ community face significant obstacles to succeeding in their fields. For those who do reach the top, it is exceptionally rare to receive recognition. In fact, only 58 of the more than 900 Nobel Prize laureates have been women. Today, we are talking with one of those women. Jennifer Doudna is a Nobel Prize-winning biochemist who co-invented the revolutionary gene editing technology CRISPR. She is also the founder of the Innovative Genomics Institute at Berkeley. I'd also like to welcome Alondra Nelson, head of the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, and the 19th's news editor, Flora Peer, who is here to lead this conversation with Jennifer and Alondra. Flora?
Thank you, Amanda. Dr. Doudna and Dr. Nelson, we are so honored to have you here with us. Let's start off by talking about your extraordinary careers. Science and academia have not always been a welcoming place for women. Could you talk about some of the early challenges you faced? What are some tools you developed along the way to survive in a male-dominated field? Dr. Doudna, if you could answer first on this one.
Well, I want to say what a pleasure it is to be here, and especially with Alondra Nelson. I've followed your career from afar for a long, long time, and it's really, truly inspiring for me to have watched your rise and to now have a chance to chat with you about, our mutual experiences in science. On my side, I grew up in a small town in Hawaii, in a family of non-scientists. I didn't have anybody to sort of follow in this career. And I honestly, when I was growing up, I didn't even know any women who were scientists. My vision of a scientist was kind of that poster we all maybe had seen of, the kind of the Albert Einstein wild hair. That was kind of how I imagined a professional scientist looking. And I didn't look like that. So I had to forge my own path. And I feel fortunate that I had mentors along the way who encouraged me at moments when I needed it. And I think that's something I always tell my own trainees now to look for, is people that will provide that kind of support and encouragement when we all need it. And also to stay true to your passions and not be dissuaded by people who might be naysayers, because we all encounter that in our lives as well.
Thanks, Flora. It's so great to be in conversation with you and with Dr. Doudna. It's great to see you, Jennifer, and so great to be in conversation. For my part, I grew up also in the West, not as far west as Dr. Doudna, in San Diego, California for the most part. And I was tracked very early on in science. And so my experience growing up, and also San Diego is such a science city, it's such a biotech city now, was, working in a medical hospital, working in a military hospital, weekend events at, the Salk Institute, summer science programs at UC San Diego, and the like. And I think it didn't occur to me until I was probably in high school or college that it was really because of Title IX that I was even able to be in those spaces. Even as being in those spaces, I was often the only girl, and certainly also the only girl of color. And I think for my generation, so I was 4 years old, I think, when Title IX was passed. You come into a world in which these possibilities exist. And if you have amazing parents like mine, they sort of send you out and convince you that there's nothing in the world you cannot do. But of course, there are landmines and obstacles and, folks who would tell you that this is not what you should be doing or trying to pursue along the way. And so in my instance, I ended up, becoming a kind of scholar and now practitioner of science and technology policy in particular. But it was really, it was really a path of not a pipeline, as we sometimes talk about in STEM, but really a kind of obstacle course, and very much aided by great mentors, much like Dr. Doudna. I think what mentors do when they're really helpful is allow you to see a kind of future and possibility and pathway for yourself that you can't imagine for yourself at the time. And so I think certainly for women in science, for women of color in science, mentors are really important for having that vision.
Dr. Nelson, your career has been defined in particular by your embrace of interdisciplinary thought. You talked a little bit about this in the science that surrounded you as you grew up, but also in the books and in the work that you've done since. It really touches on a lot of subjects. And there's a real focus on it toward justice and equity. What are some of the ways you've been able to apply that through your work at the Office of Science and Technology Policy?
Oh, thank you for that question. I'm so proud and honored every day to serve in this White House that cares so much about equity, that has made it a kind of day one commitment, which means that in an Office of Science and Technology Policy, you can take equity as a given from the very beginning. And I don't think that that's ever really happened before. So what that means, in the work that we do in the office is that we are constantly thinking about how we make policy in ways that ensure that science and technology, research and development, the outcomes, the availability of the amazing things that science and technology make possible for us are available to the most number of people, and really take seriously that it is the job of government to do that inclusive and expansive work of including people. I think what I bring to it from my own research work as a scholar of science and technology policy is an understanding that innovation is amazing and breathtaking. And we, in Washington, we're working every day to really drive that forward. But also I think an understanding that there have been very uneven roads, pathways and very uneven access to the benefits and to participation in science and technology. And that's just a truism. It's not a condemnation of science and technology or STEM, but it means that we need to really take that history and really think about what that means for how we do policymaking. So I think one has to be just forthright and honest about what has come in the past, and also I think drive forward with promise and possibility, in a sense that what has been in the past for science and technology research and policy doesn't have to be its future, and that part of how we change that is being very strategic about how we are sure to very strategic about how we include women and women of color at that table.
And My next question is for you, Dr. Doudna. You're one of the few women to win the Nobel Prize in chemistry, and it was awarded to you and your early collaborator, Dr. Emmanuelle Charpentier, who of course is another woman. So, that was a glass ceiling right there that you guys were able to punch through. So could you tell us a little bit about what the day of the announcement was like and what some of your thoughts were as you prepared to address the world?
Well, thanks for that question. It was an extraordinary day, as you might imagine, highly unanticipated and not something that I think any scientist can expect in their career. I think the thing for me that's been maybe the most remarkable about the experience has actually been the number of young girls, especially, who have reached out to me. I still get contacted almost daily by young women. They're often in high school, sometimes even younger than that, but often high schoolers or just thinking about going to college, who want to understand a little bit more about my path and are asking for either guidance or just a little bit of support as they make their journey forward in science. I think this speaks to the fact that recognition in science goes far beyond the individuals involved in that recognition. It really speaks to the value that we as a society put on science and technology and the folks that are advancing it. And we want to encourage the next generation, and we want to encourage the widest diversity of participants as possible, I feel. It's not only the right thing to do, it's the best thing to do for the science and the technology. And I think that for me, that was really exciting about this Nobel announcement, was the fact that so many young women in particular were inspired by it.
That's wonderful to hear. We're going to touch just briefly on this, but I wanted to make our audience aware of both of your parts in this worldwide effort. Can you talk a little bit about your respective roles in the fight against COVID-19, starting with Dr. Doudna and your research, and then later, Dr. Nelson, we could take over the handoff and talk about your efforts through policy?
A few years ago, I started the Innovative Genomics Institute. That's the shirt I'm wearing here. And it's a partnership between UC Berkeley and the University of California, San Francisco. So 2 campuses of the University of California, with the express purpose of applying CRISPR technology for solving real world problems, and doing so with an eye towards access and affordability. We want this technology to be as widely available as possible. Because of that, the existence of that institute, we had already assembled quite an amazing team of scientists and trainees who were part of it. And so in early 2020, I guess it was, that it was clear that the pandemic was upon us. We got together with our team and said, what can we do as scientists? How can we apply our expertise in the face of this global public health emergency? And so several things emerged from that. One is that we were able to put up a testing lab quickly at our institute. And it's quite an extraordinary feat. Probably wouldn't have happened without the pandemic, honestly, but we got approval all the way up at the level of the governor of California to have a CLIA certified clinical lab on the Berkeley campus running PCR-based tests for COVID-19. And that allowed us to service not only the campus community, many tens of thousands of people who were impacted, but also the wider community in Northern California. And amazingly, for a long time, we were the only testing lab providing testing to firefighters and police, as well as the folks that work in the California Energy Commission, who needed regular testing because they were working on site. And so that was, just really kudos to all of the volunteers that were willing to risk their own health at a time before vaccines were available to come in and run tests. The other thing that we did was to implement a wide collaboration across academic labs and companies to make not only that testing lab possible, but also to begin exploring ways that CRISPR could be used directly as a diagnostic approach. And this involved collaboration with companies like Salesforce and Thermo Fisher, but also with partners at the Gladstone Institutes and at the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory who brought their expertise to the table. And again, in many cases, without, getting, direct recognition for their work, without worrying initially about funding for their work. We had fortunately had donations from a number of philanthropists to keep us going financially. And so I think this really speaks to the value of teamwork. It's been amazing to see how much could be accomplished so quickly when people get together and put their expertise to align it to bear on a problem.
So for my part, let me just say to begin that I was one of the people deeply inspired by Dr. Doudna's being a recipient of the Nobel Prize. It was just, I think, inspiring for not just young people and little girls, for older folks as well. And it continues to be a source of great inspiration. So for my part, I would just, to begin, I would say, President Biden really tasked the Office of Science and Technology Policy with sort of thinking about the lessons that we've learned from COVID-19. And this has sort of included a few things. I mean, part of it has been moving forward with some work around pandemic preparedness. So what do we, what are the sort of, how, if this happens again, and as it's happening now, what do we need to know with regards to vaccines, with diagnostics, therapeutics, some of the work that Dr. Doudna was working on? How do we get ready for the next pandemic, even as we are also, tasked and part of OSTP with helping us think about how we live in the current, with the current pandemic. So that in that regard, I think, sort of what are we're thinking quite a lot about like, what are the implications for society and for science and technology policy, in a world that's changed with COVID, like what do we need to do to live in that world? One of the projects that we've been working on is around clean indoor air, lifting up the work of the CDC and the EPA around the fact that, clean indoor air can really help to reduce people's exposure to COVID-19 and to other infectious diseases, and indeed can help us be more healthy overall. So that is, a pivot from some of the work that's happening in the White House that's really about the day-to-day response to the pandemic, to really sort of thinking, as OSTP does in its work, a little bit into the future or a little bit into the present about what we need to do to keep moving forward. We've also been, it was clear from COVID-19, from our experience of the last 2 years, that we didn't have the data that we needed to really understand what communities were being impacted, how they were being impacted, whether or not there were different kinds of frequencies of disease, of mortality, of infection in different communities. One big endeavor of our work at OSTP and of the Biden-Harris administration has been a body called the Equitable Data Working Group. And part of that is to sort of think about strategies that allow us to have data that can answer questions about who's being impacted differently or disproportionately, and then for government to be able to respond to communities that are most in need. So that's some of the work that we've been doing. And then, of course, as a sociologist of science, I bring to the office real questions about scientific communication, around trust in government and institutions. How do we think about the space of trust and information integrity in the context of this pandemic, but also in the context of how we communicate about science and technology, research and policy more generally?
And building off that, I'd like you to answer this question first, this next one. We are, we are in a time where there are a great number of developments with big impact on humankind. We have the mRNA vaccines, which are relatively new. We have things going on in Silicon Valley that will continue to affect our lives for decades to come. And both of you, through your work, you do a lot of work in the realm of ethics and how discoveries and technology can be used to make society better. And could you tell us a little about your guiding principles, about some of your goals when you're making these decisions, and also some of the biggest dangers we may face?
Sure. I think, one of the things that was the founding mandates of OSTP that I think often gets lost, if we're going to talk about the work that we're doing at the White House, is that when the office is established in 1976, the congressional mandate, the statute says that we're both supposed to offer advice about new technologies and how they can benefit American society, but also to think about possible unforeseen consequences. So that in 1976 was part of the founding mission of the office. And so today we might think about it as ethics, but I think it's clear that the work of policymaking, in addition, is, I think ethics is certainly, and bioethics in particular, is certainly a part of that, but that there are ways that we need to be thinking as the pace of innovation quickens about how there will be, these changes, which will be, we need to be thinking about what we can do to make sure that these changes or innovations are beneficial. And so part of how we've been thinking about that in the office is really thinking upstream in the innovation kind of pipeline. So right now, we've been tasked with the president with thinking about digital assets and cryptocurrency. And in that work right now, we're thinking already, before there are any kind of government decisions made about this, about what might be the climate implications of that. So these are kind of two, Flora, to your point, like two big challenges. The climate crisis, climate change is a significant challenge. What are the most significant challenges of our time? And it's also important to have innovation in the space of currency and assets, particularly for communities that are unbanked and don't have access to resources. And so how can we do a kind of science and technology policy around digital assets, but also around artificial intelligence that is sort of thinking about both the benefits and the unforeseen consequences, and then sort of creating policy that is nimble and is dynamic as the sort of systems and innovations that we're building out.
It was clear early in the work that I was doing with my collaborator, Emmanuel Charpentier, on CRISPR-based genome editing, that this field was going to have very significant impacts in society in the future, and would come along with ethical concerns and issues about responsible use. In the beginning, I felt like I had no grounding, certainly no professional background in ethics or bioethics, but I realized that if I didn't get involved, who would? I had to get involved because I was there at the genesis of the technology. So that for me has been a really inspiring part of my journey over the last decade, is all the people that I've met who are more than willing to share their expertise, to get involved in this field. The implications of genome editing span everything from the impacts and the potential impacts in the environment, in agricultural uses of genome editing, to things like manipulating the human germline, meaning making changes in human embryos that become heritable in us as humans. And the implications of that, of course, are quite profound. So it's it's been not always a smooth path, that's for sure, but incredibly important that scientists are involved in this and in this work and in this now global conversation. So I was proud that our institute was the first to convene a meeting on this topic back in early 2015. And that led to the national academies in the US and the Royal Society in the UK teaming up to work together, and eventually with the academies in Asia as well, to sponsor global meetings on the topic. And that has, I think, been critical to putting the word out, getting scientists around the world to think about these issues, to engage on them, and importantly, to connect with people who are not scientists, but are stakeholders in other ways, whether they are people who are affected by genetic disease, whether they are people who are concerned about the environment and who isn't these days. So I think that that this has been a critical role now of the and now increasingly this is being taken up by the World Health Organization, by the UN. So it's been important, I think, that really just emphasizing that it started as a grassroots effort of a few scientists saying we need to get out in front of a really groundbreaking technology that has great value, but also comes along with risk.
I could just add, Flora, I mean, I've been, Dr. Doudna has been such a leader in this space, and really as she was just describing, thinking early on in the technology. I mean, scientists and technologists know better than the general public what are some of the transformative possibilities for good and for bad of the technologies that they're working in. And her leadership has been extraordinary. I mean, the germline editing affects the entire all of human population, so it's not just a choice about one scientist or one lab. And so it's been, inspiring to watch her leadership there and on this important topic.
Is this something that we will be looking at from a federal policy perspective anytime soon?
We've got federal policy around genetics and genomics. I mean, and we've also got pretty good ethical norms. So, the national academies and some of the work that Dr. Doudna was talking about, have participated in conversations, and there have been strong recommendations that human germline editing should not be done, and that there should be, I think, norms and guardrails around other kinds of gene editing. We've got, CLIA laboratories like the ones that Dr. Doudna mentioned are regulated by the FDA. The NIH has a role here. So there's regulation, but I think I think if we take Dr. Doudna's example that she started, the work that she started doing in 2015 to really to be thinking about the social implications alongside the technology, I think the bigger lesson here is that as a kind of case study or a pilot or a model for how we should be thinking about the ways that scientists, social scientists, and should be working with members of the public around a variety of innovation. So CRISPR certainly is a key one and a very important one. But as I mentioned before, something like artificial intelligence, quantum information science, or all sorts of things sort of coming down the line that we really need to be thinking about as a society, as a global community.
Yeah, these are all big questions, and it's going to take a while to get them all answered, I think.
And you've got women leading the way.
I sure hope so. And that brings us back to Title IX, which we are here to celebrate, and we're here to talk about this grand piece of policy and its role in making playing fields, classrooms, and ultimately the workplace more gender equitable. So I have a question for each of you. Dr. Doudna, what are some of the ways your field has improved in terms of gender equity?
It's been amazing. I mean, I think we're seeing the fruits of some of the work that's gone in over the last few decades now, where we see increasingly women who are in leadership roles, whether it's in academic settings or in government public policy, like Dr. Nelson, or in business and biotech. There's more work to be done for sure, but I think we're on a good trajectory. I'll also just mention that my first experience with Title IX was actually when I was still in school in Hawaii, and I had a chance to play on a soccer team. First girls soccer team that my school had ever had started while I was there, and probably wouldn't have been in existence without Title IX.
Yeah, well, certainly it was true of my, high school track team. I think, indeed, I think the high school that I went to was not even coeducational a few years before I started going there. So things have changed very quickly. I would say, I think I would add on to it or agree with what Dr. Doudna said. Certainly women's access to and girls' access to educational opportunities, to after school programs, to athletics, there should, effectively Title IX, building on the Civil Rights Act of 1964, effectively says there is no space in society, no institution that has federal support that should be closed or constrained or limited by gender, and that women and girls should have access to all of these things. And, it still remains a really powerful and awesome statement of who we aspire to be as a society. Obviously, it has allowed me to be in, educational spaces and athletic spaces that I might not have had access to had I been born even a decade before, 15 years before. But there's still a lot more to do. And I've been really encouraged by, I think quite a lot about rights, about civil rights. It's part of how I think about equity in science as well. And one of the, over the last sort of decade or 15 years, one of, I think, the more inspiring, I think, episodes for me has been how young people, particularly young women, young girls of color, have really taken up Title IX as their own, really in a way that, so, I understood, I guess, some abstract relationship to Title IX and my ability to do things at school and in the world. But, young women today really understand that it is, very clearly that it is a right that they have, and it is a lever that they can use in their politics. And I find that really inspiring, and also both on the level of what young people and young women in particular are doing, how they're trying to leverage the right, but also that our civil rights, that our gender rights, our human rights, are things that we are always renewing, reasserting, that these are living things in the world. And I think as we celebrate this anniversary, that's one of the more inspiring things to me. Like, it's the 50 years is not like a law up on a shelf. It is kind of a living, breathing thing in people's lives.
All right, one last quick fire question, because we're about out of time here. If each of you could just tell me in one sentence, what would you say to a young woman or a gender diverse person who is interested in science? Dr. Nelson, you want to take this one first?
I would say, what would I say? I would say, don't, have no boundaries, allow no other people, no law, no institution, no others to set the boundaries or for what you might be or do in the world. And I think I say that, going back to an earlier comment, as a kind of mentor to unknown others who are sitting with us in this conversation today, which is to, help them to sort of boldly see a future for themselves that they might not be able to see for themselves. So don't accept boundaries.
And I would say, just following up on that, couldn't agree more. And, be bold, be visionary, and look for people that will support you in your journey. I do think that is really critical for everybody, but certainly for folks that are coming into a field that has traditionally not been as welcoming, and where we really want to see diversity, playing a key role in the future.
Thank you very much, Dr. Doudna and Dr. Nelson. We really appreciate you taking the time to share your thoughts with our audience today. It means a great deal to us.
What a fantastic conversation to end the day. Thank you all for joining us as we examined how Title IX currently shapes our classrooms, our workplaces, and our career opportunities. And another special thanks to today's presenting sponsor, the Impact Seat Foundation and the Walton Family Foundation, and our supporting sponsors, the Barbara Lee Family Foundation, the Girls' Rights Project, the Lumina Foundation, and the Tory Burch Foundation. We'd also like to thank our media partner, USA Today, our academic partner, Arizona State University, and our community partner, the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Library in Washington, D.C. If you liked what you saw during today's summit, we so hope you'll join the 19th. We are a member-supported nonprofit newsroom and simply cannot put on events like this without the support of people like you. You can join now by donating at 19thnews.org/membership. You can also support our nonprofit newsroom by signing up for our free newsletter at 19thnews.org/subscribe. And a reminder, if you sign up between now and the end of Summit tomorrow, you're eligible to win that special Summit swag bag. So go sign up. Finally, if you missed any part of today's program or you just want to rewatch, visit 19thnews.org/summit. And that's a wrap for day 2 of the 19th Represents 2022. Join us tomorrow for our final set of Title IX conversations as we explore the unfinished work of gender equality. We'll be talking about the pay gap and protections for LGBTQ+ students. We'll hear from key leaders including U.S. Secretary of Education Miguel Cardona, National Women's Soccer League Commissioner Jessica Berman, and Maya Wiley, President and CEO of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. We'll be streaming again right here, but if you are in DC and want to join us in person, there is still time to register for a seat. Visit 19thnews.org/summit for more information. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern Time.